Oh, there's that movie script I wrote. Where did you find it?
On my pillow.
It's got the perfect part for you. Either one of you. It's about a killer robot driving instructor who travels back in time for some reason. Ron Howard's attached to direct.
I am not.
Well, he expressed an interest.
No, I didn't.
Did too?
I did not.
You lie!
Hi, everybody, and welcome to a very special Non-Denominational Holiday Fun Fest episode of the Springfield Googleplex, the movie podcast for Simpson fans, brought to you by thatshelf.com. Each week, we talk about a movie parodied on The Simpsons. Maybe it was The Simpsons that introduced us to the film, or maybe when we finally saw it, we said, hey, that's where that Simpson joke came from. Regardless, each week we pick one that one of us hasn't seen or hasn't seen in a while, watch it, and come together to discuss. I'm your host, Adam Scholes, and joining me as always is the John Connor to my Kyle Reese, my co-host, Nate Storing. How are you today, my friend?
I'm doing okay. Does that make you my dad?
Yes, yes, I think so.
His best friend.
And
right.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. Perfect.
Pretty accurate. And you may have heard another voice, a third voice, and that's because this week we are also joined by a very special guest. He's been called the villain of Letterboxd. He's a longtime staffer at Seattle's own Scarecrow Video, the largest video archive of VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray in the world. And he's the co-host of the Viva Physical Media YouTube show and the Suspense is Killing Us podcast. It's Matt Lynch. How are you doing today, Matt?
Hi, I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on the show. We were saying just before we started recording that you are the first guest that we've had that we haven't had to beg or blackmail into coming onto the show. You actually sort of invited yourself.
I did. I was listening to, I think it was the Bill Oakley thing, and I was like, I gotta get on this show.
Well, we're very excited to have you. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to join us.
Thank you for indulging me.
Of course, anytime. Well, for this year's Non-Denominational Holiday Fun Fest, because we always like to, well, not always, we started with a very traditional holiday film, It's a Wonderful Life, and then we followed that up with a less traditional holiday film, The Exorcist, because as we spoke about, it was released on Boxing Day. So this year, we decided to go with James Cameron's groundbreaking sci-fi action thriller, The Terminator, which is also celebrating its 40th anniversary this year and was just recently re-released on 4K Ultra HD for my fellow physical media fans. Though it should be pointed out that we're recording this actually before that the disc has been released, so don't expect any hot takes on how it looks or anything. But
I've seen the disc; it looks really good.
Oh, good. That's good to hear. Okay,
Yeah,
interesting.
If you've heard of the controversy over Cameron's other 4Ks,
Yes.
This is largely immune from those symptoms. It looks really nice.
That's good to hear, because I bought The Abyss because I was like, well,
That one looks okay. I'm okay with that one.
Aliens does not look so great, and I bought True Lies on iTunes and watched about 5 minutes and turned it off because it looked so bad.
I bought them all, and I'm probably going to get rid of my True Lies and Aliens. I have nicer copies of both of them.
Yeah.
I have print scans of them.
Oh, nice.
So they look much better. They have a certain look to them that I prefer.
Yeah, totally. Well, on that note, you might remember the Terminator from such Simpsons episodes as, and get ready, there's quite a few here. Season 2's Principal Charming, maybe. Season 3's Treehouse of Horror 2. Season 4's Selma's Choice. Season 5's Boy Scouts in the Hood. Season 7's Treehouse of Horror 6. Season 8's Treehouse of Horror 7. Season 9's Treehouse of Horror 8. Season 10's When You Dish Upon a Star. And, of course, today's episode, Season 11's Grift of the Magi. But before we get into all that, Matt, I want to get a better sense of you as a Simpson fan and what your history is with The Simpsons. It sounds like you're a lot like Nate and I in that you can't really go a couple of hours without dropping a Simpsons reference, so...
Yeah, and my two of my best friends are the same way. So whenever we talk, you'll have whole conversations in Simpsons quotes, or any given situation in your daily life will make you say to your friend, Flanders was a zombie, something like that, It's just constant. My girlfriend is not a fan of the show. She doesn't know anything about the show. It's constant for her. It drives her crazy because I'll say something stupid and then have to explain it to her. It really pisses her off. You talk about my podcast. My friend Travis is one of my two good buddies who are big Simpsons fanatics. And we co-host that with another woman, Emily, and she doesn't really know anything about the show. She's always bored when we're on the show, and we just start riffing on Simpsons stuff. So I was in the 6th grade when the show premiered.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so I watched it as a kid, and then, by the time I got to college, it had been on for 10, 11, 12 seasons. I went to college in 95, and on campus cable, there was the local Fox affiliate and also the CBC, the Canadian Broadcast Company channel, whatever. And so I would get 3 Simpsons episodes per day in syndication.
Yeah.
And I'd already been in love with the show, but then I'd be home from class and I'd watch 3 back-to-back episodes, and then I started taping them and editing out the commercials so I could just throw a cassette of them on and watch The Simpsons whenever I wanted. And that's why I would say season 2 or 3 until about season 9, I have largely memorized.
Sure.
Right.
Anything after that is like, I'll remember occasional bits, nothing too crazy, or certain episodes. And then by the time we get to like around the period we're going to talk about today, that's when I stopped watching. And I really never went back.
Right.
I don't think I've watched a new episode of The Simpsons in like 20 years, if not more. And it always amazes me that like at least once a year, some charlatan will go, oh, it's good still. Oh, this episode was good. Sometimes I'll get tricked into watching it. I'm just instantly mad.
I mean, it's super different for sure.
It's super different, yeah.
I gave the most recent season a shot, and I was impressed by how creative the show feels again.
Damn you, sir.
I know. But it's like, the thing is, like, if you only watch one episode, and this is what Adam always says, it's like the voice acting is completely different. Everyone sounds, a lot older, which they are. And the feel of the show isn't the same at all, right? Like the sense of humor, even the pacing of the episodes, like everything is completely different.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like you have to just turn off that part of your brain that even associates it with like the old show and then just watch it as like its own thing. And some of the new episodes I really enjoyed, but there is a large area in the middle.
Not today, Satan. You are not going to trick me this time.
Fair enough. Teach their own,
What I was going to say, it's interesting, Matt, because you say you were in the 6th grade when it premiered, so you're
something like that. Yeah.
You're a few years older than us, and
I'm a few years older than everyone, dude.
Okay, well, fair enough. Yeah, Nate and I are both the age of the show. That's sort of the crazy thing. Like so it premiered in '89.
So you don't remember a time before The Simpsons?
No, there's no BS.
My parents tried to stop me from watching the show because it was a bad influence, man.
Yeah, of course. But what I was going to say is I think it's interesting in that Nate and I both kind of fall off the show a little bit later because we were a certain age. It was around high school, I think, when we both kind of fell off the show. It was
around the time we met that we fell off the show. Basically.
Which would put the show at like season 14 or 15.
So like you guys replaced the show for each other in each other's hearts.
Pretty much.
Yeah, we were our own reruns, basically.
Yeah, and then the DVD started coming out, and we're like, oh, now we can just watch the good episodes again.
Yeah, I only own 3 through 9.
There you go. Yeah, nice. So it is interesting. The people that we talk to, I'm always sort of fascinated about both their history with the show, but also like where the show drops in their evolution and their age and how that affects their love of the show or their take on the show. Again, I guess we came to appreciate it when the show was sort of deeper into the run, whereas you were able to appreciate it sort of like right out of the gate because you would have been prime age. So that's fascinating.
Yes. I have very specific ideas about where the show stopped being good. Like any Simpsons hardcore nerd, it's a matter of ethics, really.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. But that sort of leads me to my next question, which is there a movie that you remember watching, and as we sort of say in the intro, where it clicked and you're like, oh, that's what that Simpson joke was?
There is absolutely no way that didn't happen to me, but I don't have a specific memory of it.
Right.
Sure.
And I think that's partly because I thought the show was funny as a kid because Bart was a prankster and Homer was a dummy. And the specifics of the humor, of the style and tone of the animation, these were not things that I was clocking in the 6th grade. It was only in my later years, and especially when I was in college, which incidentally, not coincidentally, coincided with me becoming, along that same period of time, a pretty hardcore movie fan, a cinephile, and going to film school. And so my appreciation of the show coincided with me becoming a film lover. And so it's intertwined to me. So I don't think I could point to any specific thing. Somebody asked me on the internet once if there were episodes from Golden Age Simpsons or jokes from Golden Age Simpsons that I thought were from like really obscure movies. And I was like, I stopped watching around season 10 or 11. The movies that they're referencing in that period are obscure to nobody anymore.
Right.
You know, it's like there are a million Citizen Kane jokes. I don't know if you could count that film as obscure even then, but certainly not now.
Yeah, totally.
And obviously I didn't see Citizen Kane until I was older, but I understood what it was. I'd seen clips of the show. So if I didn't understand specifically the entirety of the reference to Rosebud, I knew that Rosebud was the sled from Citizen Kane.
Right.
But like the beginning part where his family gives him away and shit like that, you know, that didn't clock with me.
Yeah.
Little
totally.
things like that.
Yeah, I mean, like they had basically parodied something like 80% of the AFI Top 100 before the AFI Top 100 existed.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, it's the canon, right? In a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like I saw The Shining before I saw The Shining.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, of course.
But I totally
many
knew
of
that that's what that was.
Yeah. Well, and what's going to be interesting about the film that we're talking about today, of course, and Nate and I have been analyzing this and the sort of like, they tend to pick movies to parody that have already sort of established themselves within that canon.
Yeah.
And I think, obviously, Terminator very quickly sort of established itself as being an iconic film. But, like, for it to be... It's only 15 years old when they're parodying it, which is, like... in the context of what they normally cover, is a relatively modern film for them to be doing a parody of.
Well,
would
that's
argue-
this episode, but they parodied it long
multiple
before
times.
that. Too.
Yes, exactly. True. That's also true.
I would further argue that the majority of the references, like not to get too granular, are more Terminator 2 references than they are Terminator references.
That's true. Yeah, there's sort of a fuzzy line with some of these where it's like, it's the IP of it all, right? Where it's
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
well, they're referencing the Terminator, the character, the Terminator, but is it because of the first movie or the second movie? Who knows, right?
I think this one specifically is more from the first movie.
Yeah, agreed.
But like, I think the majority of the references, like including the one you've got on your shirt there, that's T2.
Yes. Yes.
Totally.
The
didn't
famous
mean-
Homer going into the grass meme.
I didn't mean to be on brand today, but I just so happened that I am wearing.
you brought the shirt to the show. That's
I'm
fine.
wearing. No, I usually wear my Gracie Films hoodie when we record, but
That's very cool.
yeah. Well, there you go.
at least on this call, it's very cool.
Yeah,
I know,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think I get a lot of compliments when I wear it outside of.
I have a hat that says "Feeling Fine" in the font from The Shining. No one gets it. No one gets that one at all.
Yeah, I also I really want that Millpool hat, but
Oh, yeah.
There's a Millpool hat?
yeah.
Fuck you, I have to have that.
Yeah, we'll send you some links. There's a place that
I'll
is
pay like
redacted.
$40 for that. It's disgusting.
Yeah. Well, okay. So while we have you here, Nate and I are big, physical media nerds, and obviously, I'm sure most of our listeners are as well. Obviously, the Simpsons DVDs are sort of like the gold standard for how you make a DVD season of a television series.
Except for when they did those shitty face covers.
We've litigated that.
Yeah, believe me, it's a problem.
I hope somebody got fired over that one.
Yeah. Packaging aside, the content of the DVDs cannot be beat. But wearing your Scarecrow video hat for a second, what's your elevator pitch on why physical media matters?
Oh, physical media matters for one very crucial reason. If you buy a DVD, that's your DVD. If you rent a DVD, you have to give it back, but you can watch it however many times you want. The reason that physical media is important is because the suits, the studios, they will try to get you to pay as many times as they can, as often as possible, for something that they want to be able to take away from you whenever they want. Physical media is there for you to keep and treasure so that you can constantly revisit your favorite films, your favorite TV shows, your favorite music, your favorite books, whenever you want. And so that they can't steal that shit from you, man, and they will steal it. They're actively trying to take it away from you.
Yeah.
That's why physical media is important. I don't know if you guys remember DivX.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
You know,
The physical DivX or
the physical
digital?
DivX, not the codec DivX, but the physical DivX, which was when they realized that the tech had finally got there to where they might be able to charge you every time you watched a movie that you had already purchased.
Yeah.
And it failed miserably. But we've gotten to a point now where people are like, that's how it is. That's just what we're stuck with. On the other side of that, people are like, well, I don't think I should have to pay for anything ever.
Well,
It's
yeah,
like,
right.
I'm sorry, if nobody's getting paid, then nobody's getting paid. Then we're not going to have any more art anyway. So we all lose that way too. That's why physical media is great. $20, you're out.
Yeah. I mean, a classic example for Simpsons fans is like, how can you listen to the Simpsons commentaries these days, right?
Right.
Not on Disney Plus.
They're not on there? Okay.
No,
that's
not
a
on
bummer.
Disney Plus.
It's weird that they're not on there, but I
They
mean,
used to be on
it's
FX.
not weird. Oh, really?
Back
They were
when it
on
was
there?
streaming there. You could listen to the commentaries, but they have not put it on Disney Plus. But if you have the DVDs, you can still do that, and you can get all the other cool shit that was on those DVDs. So
I mean, the main reason in the case of specifically the Simpsons DVDs, the extras are great. The commentaries are extremely illuminating and funny. The main reason is, and I know you can stream this way, but they're in 1:33. They're an original aspect ratio.
Yeah, that too, yeah.
I, due to circumstances that I don't want to get into, had to watch Grift of the Magi in the 16:9 version, and I was just furious. Like, I just was so mad. It's like there would be like a Kent Brockman segment, and it's window boxed on the side. I'm like, thank God, that's nice. Okay, and then it would cut to like another shot that was clearly cropped where the credits are stretched. Oh God, it was making me so mad.
This is another. I always talk about one of the things that feels wrong about the new seasons is that it's in HD, and it just
it looks
feels,
too it's too clean.
It doesn't look right. It doesn't look right. Yeah. I have an entire shelf that is fully occupied by the seasons 1 through whatever it is, and then I've got the James Bond 50th anniversary box
I have that too. It's sitting on the very top of my shelf.
Well, exactly. That's okay. So Anyway, we're gonna talk about Grift of the Magi, season 11, episode 9, directed by Matthew Nastak, written by Tom Martin, who I looked it up. Tom Martin's only written about 3 Simpson episodes, but he also was a writer on one of my favorite shows from high school, Clone High, which recently got rebooted.
Is that Lord Miller?
Yeah. And then was also a co-writer on A Very Merry Muppet Christmas Movie and The Muppets Wizard of Oz. So that's who Tom Martin is.
Okay.
Original air date, December 19th, 1999, 15 years after the release of Terminator. It guest stars Tim Robbins, who coincidentally directed and starred in Bob Roberts, a movie we briefly touched on earlier this season, and Gary Coleman as himself in one of my favorite celebrity cameos on The Simpsons. Nate, can you sort of talk us through the reference on this one?
Yeah, I mean, so the reference comes mostly at the end, but like this is the episode that has Funzo, which I think a lot of people will remember, right? Like the kid's toy that's kind of a parody of Furby, but is also trying to kill the competition. And at the end, Homer takes a writhing sack of Funzos and throws them into the tire fire.
Writhing Funzos in my sack makes me happy, makes me hurt my back.
And they're on fire and everything. And then one of them comes back to life, very much like the Terminator does in this movie, completely on fire and just the metal exoskeleton.
I'm very mad at you.
That's basically the parody, right? I mean, you could kind of argue the first appearance of Funzo in this episode too, where it's just the metal skeleton and it kind of reaches out towards Lisa. Kind of similar to the ending of this movie too, right? Where it's just the torso that's kind of reaching out towards Sarah. It's not a lot. I mean, I was looking around at the other parodies of the Terminator, and they're all really tiny. And even some of the ones that I think on the commentary they say are parodies are actually not. The computer vision sort of stuff that is in this movie, we talked about this on the Westworld episode. There are several movies that use that, right?
Right.
There's Westworld, there's this, and then there's RoboCop. And so one of the ones that I think on the commentary they say is Terminator, when I went back and looked at it, I'm like, no, this is definitely RoboCop. The music is RoboCop. The style of it's RoboCop. There's none of the red filter or anything like that. And it has the text.
That's got to be one of those things where the people that made it have been away from it too long. And they're just oh, yeah, it's like that thing. Something. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's there's the writers and then there's the animators, right? And sometimes those references are really coming from the animators. And they're very rarely on the actual commentary or not driving the commentary, at least. So.
We also got a couple other movie references in this episode, though. Do you want to talk us through those as well?
Yeah. These seasons on the commentaries, the writers don't talk as much about the movie references. And so when you go and look online about like what the movie references are, they're actually really thin. And so this is where I feel like we've been able to actually spot a lot of stuff that I don't think other people have spotted, or at least it's not like, on the common places on the internet.
This is a Mike Scully season, correct?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, season 11, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, yeah, Mike Scully doesn't talk as much about the references. Okay, so here are 3 that I spotted on a rewatch that I had never spotted before. Can't see anyone else on the internet talking about it. So there's a reference to The Godfather Part 2, right? Which is just the fact that you have Fat Tony with his, like, Valdazzo Brothers olive oil company, right? I mean, that's got to be a reference, right, to Godfather Part 2 and Vito's olive oil company and that kind of thing. Kind of
That's probably just Godfather blanket. He had the olive oil company in the first one, too. It's just, But the olive oil company is 100%. That's the joke. That's a Godfather reference,
Yeah, totally. Okay, here's another one that's, like, actually really on the nose. Again, hadn't seen anyone mention it. The Nice Man Giveth, the name of the kid's play for Mr. Burns. The Iceman Cometh, right?
Right,
of course. But again, no one had tracked that one before. This is a super weird one. The Telephone. Have you seen this movie, Matt?
Charles Bronson, Don Siegel, like 1978 or something like that. Yeah, the guy kills people over the phone. Yeah.
No. This is the one with that might
you
be
mean Whoopi Goldberg?
Whoopi Goldberg. That's the one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the reference of Gary Coleman is talking to someone on the phone, but it's not actually plugged in, right? On the commentary, even they actually say that's a reference to this movie.
Really?
Yes.
Which was like
interesting.
I don't know if you know this, but at the time that movie came out, it was kind of like a notorious boondoggle flop.
Right. Totally. I just actually finished editing our episode on The Magic Christian, which is based on this Terry Southern novel. Terry Southern wrote the script for The Telephone as well. So fun little connection there.
There we go.
But yeah, super weird reference. Like of all the things you could reference, The Telephone.
Comedy writers are weird.
And they like Terry Southern, so what can you say?
Yes, they do. Clearly.
That is a problem for them.
Yeah. And then, of course, at the very end, you get like kind of 2 intertwined references with like A Christmas Carol.
And Gary Coleman was as good as his word. As for old Mr. Burns, he was visited by 3 ghosts during the night.
But then it's kind of intertwined with like a little nod to It's a Wonderful Life with Moe. What is it?
While Moe, seeing what the world would be like if he had never been born, pulled his head out of the oven and replaced it with a plump Christmas goose.
Happy holidays, there.
Merry Christmas, Mo!
So, yeah, that's a nice non-denominational season appropriate reference at the end there.
I love that. That Mo gag does get me every time.
Yeah.
He took his head out of the oven and replaced it with a nice Christmas goose.
The goose looks so awful. It's like
It does not look
plucked
cooked.
and like its head is just
And he has a sign that says no funeral on his back. So bleak. Oh, jeez. Okay. More and more I like to actually kind of capture some of the mystery references. Because like rewatching the show, I was like, there is a lot of stuff in here that I'm like, I don't know what this is a reference to, or it might be this, but maybe not, right? Okay. Homer stealing Christmas. Is it a reference to the Grinch? What do we think? Too loose?
Well, they do a very direct riff on that in another Christmas episode. I can't remember which one it is, but it's the one where Homer basically, like, he keeps buying himself stuff. I can't remember the context of it. It's on that Simpsons Christmas DVD, though. But
yeah,
and he sings "You're a Nice Guy, Homer J."
You're a hero, Homer J.
Wow, I don't think I've seen this one.
Yeah, that sounds like a later one.
Yeah, it would be like season probably like 12, 13, 14.
Right.
But
I find it unlikely that they would do a Grinch bit and not do a weird song or like some rhyming.
Which is, like I said, that's what they actually do in this parody. He sings the "You're."
Or they would do
Mr.
like a slinky Grinch animation. They would do something, but it's not that it's a stretch. It just seems like they would be more explicit about it.
Yeah, then they have referenced it before, and it usually is more like that. It's like an animation thing or a song thing. So I think that's a good call. Okay, here's another one. Is Patrick Ewing as the genie a reference to Kazam?
Interesting. Okay.
Basketball player dressed as a genie on a Christmas special. It seems like a really random joke otherwise, because it has nothing to do with what's going on. But I never thought about it.
That's not an alien situation for the show. At this period, they were still just doing shit like that. I'm not going to say you're wrong. I don't think that it is, but if somebody told me that it was, I wouldn't be surprised.
Right.
It's such a non sequitur, though. Like, and that's what makes the joke funny, because it's like, why would there be a genie at Christmas? But
it's funnier if it's a non sequitur.
Yeah.
And also, I fall back on this a lot because I have, as maybe you probably do, a lot of arguments about this kind of thing. and I kind of always land on the side of, like, if there was a reference to a specific thing, you would know it. Subtlety is not in their wheelhouse. It's not the assignment.
Yep. It's every once in a while there's something really weird, though. It's like, every once in a while they're like, oh yeah, this plot is taken from this like movie that is obscure by today's standards, and you're like, oh shit, I've never heard of that.
And like one of the great movie references of this in The Simpsons of all time is from a movie that is pretty well known by cinephiles now, but at the time had not been seen in ages and nobody knew about it. And it's the sorcerer gag in Mr. Plow.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
yeah, exactly.
Like, totally.
Yeah.
That's one that I definitely didn't know was a joke from a movie until I saw Sorcerer. That's a good one. Yeah. That just sort of popped in my head that, like, there's no way I would have known that was a thing. And then after I watched Sorcerer and then watched Mr. Plow again later, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, totally.
But again, there's no way you could mistake that Sorcerer gag for something else.
Right.
You might not know it's a reference to something, but once you know, you know. So they always err on the side of, like, yes, this is that joke from that thing.
Right. But even the Terminator reference in this is, like, on the fence. Before we decided to do this episode, I actually pinged Mike Scully on Twitter and was like, just to confirm, is this actually a reference to the Terminator? And he literally just replied, like, yes.
Well, there you go.
But it's like, it definitely looks like a reference to the Terminator, but it's not like there's no score sort of thing. There's no dialogue. It's just a visual sort of thing.
What makes this one closer is that it's specifically a robot.
Yes.
But and they actually, the design of the skeleton Funzo has Terminator-y vibes to it. But like the actual joke itself could come from any slasher movie. Because it works the same way in Terminator. It's like, we killed him. Oh, no, he's not dead yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Okay, I got one more sort of mystery reference here. Homer says, like, when Lisa's trying to convince them that, like, there's this killer robot, he says, ugh, is this going to be like one of those horror movies where we open the door and everything's normal and we think you're crazy, and then there's really a killer robot, and the next morning you find me impaled on a weather vane? And I was like, when I heard that, I was like, okay, yeah, it's just like a generic line. But impaled on a weather vane stood out to me as being like, that's very specific.
Oddly specific, yeah.
Yeah, and so I was looking around. There's a famous death in The Omen.
Yeah, David Warner gets impaled on the cross from the top of the steeple, yeah.
It's not a cross, though. I'm pretty sure it is like a rod, weirdly. So I'm like, I'm not 100% sure on that one, but it seems so specific that I'm like, it feels like it's reaching for a reference, but I don't know what it is.
I think that you're probably sort of half right. Like, the weather vane bit is probably because somebody saw it in The Omen, and they're looking for, like, something iconic,
right?
That sort of subconsciously everyone will clock. Because if it's something too random, then the joke doesn't land.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I feel like a lot of the references are really more about references to tropes, right? And so often we end up trying to, like, find the origin of a trope. I feel like this is one of those things where it's like, maybe a reference to The Omen, but maybe also just a reference to something that happens in movies like The Omen, right?
Yeah.
So there you go. Those are the main references that I came up with from this episode.
Fascinating. I mean, there's also obviously some, like, TV references playing off of the Gary Coleman stuff, but we don't cover TV on this show, so that's
TV.
Is there any other stuff from the episode that, like, sticks out to you that you want to talk about? I have to say, this is... So, Matt, I don't know if you've listened to our episodes where we discuss Treehouse of Horror, but I sort of famously am not super versed in the Treehouse of Horror episodes because I usually skip them on my rewatches because I'm like, they're so Halloween specific that unless it's Halloween, I don't want to watch them.
Yeah, exactly.
I know, I'm a psychopath. But I love Christmas.
That's crazy. Have you seen a doctor?
Yeah, I know. It's a problem. But I love Christmas, and at Christmas time, I watch Christmas movies, and I watch Christmas Simpson episodes. Like I said, I had the Christmas Simpsons DVD, so I've watched this episode many, many times. It is one of my sort of favorite of the Christmas episodes. It's also one of the few Christmas episodes that doesn't make me cry because it's not horribly depressing or upsetting. It's just like a joke machine.
The best one is the one where Bart gets busted for shoplifting with Lawrence Tierney. That still makes me really cringe. I'm like, absolutely.
It's hard to watch. So I do really like this episode, but I mean, Matt, you did sort of allude to earlier that you're not a big fan of season 11. So I'm curious, what was your experience rewatching this? Did you enjoy it? Did you find stuff to like, or?
Yeah. There's funny stuff here. There was one thing that really made me laugh out loud. It was during the scene, it's after the school has been shut down and they're having like a party and Homer just keeps interjecting and Flanders just makes a suggestion like, I've got an RV, we could sell that. And Homer's like, why don't you shut up? And I just thought that was really like, that kind of stuff really works for me. Or like, Mo, why don't you get some shoes? Oh, like my bags? And he's got like Wonder Bread bags tied on his feet. There's some funny
really
stuff
good
in these
one-liners. Like, I love when Skinner says, and here's the first of what I hope will be many disabled students.
Right. Kind of vaguely threatening.
And I like all the Skinner stuff in this. Like, I think Skinner's just funny. There's a moment in this that I was looking at, because I watched it a couple of weeks ago, and I watched it again today. And there's a moment that I think sums up that this is a transitional period for the show and for me as a fan. Where, like, again, Flanders is like, I could sell my RV, and Moe's like, we could sell liquor. And Skinner goes, people, these are all good ideas. And Marge interrupts him and says, no, they're terrible ideas. And I'm like, don't let her say that. Cut that line. The joke is funnier if it's like, people, please, these are good ideas, but they're not what we need right now. Like, that's enough.
Interesting. See,
I'm not asking for it to be subtle. I just think it's funnier if you don't draw attention to the joke.
Right. Nate, you also flagged this, but it got me thinking about it. My memory of The Simpsons was the idea of like your act 1 has absolutely nothing to do with your act 3, and how you get there is like this crazy dovetail, and to try and unwind like how does A get to Z is difficult. And then the episodes we sort of covered haven't really been like that, but this feels like the first episode where it truly is like that first act has nothing to do with the final act.
But this one takes it to the next level because I think each act is a distinct story, right?
Yes.
Because you have the very beginning, right, which is, Bart breaks his coccyx.
No, the beginning part is they can't go outside because the sun is a laser beam and it's going to kill them.
Yeah.
A Robin Williams level of hairiness.
Right,
yes.
Right. Which leads to Bart eventually breaking his coccyx through a series of events. And then you have the whole thing about the school in the middle.
Shutting down, yeah.
The school shutting down, being privatized by a corporation. And then it goes into the whole Funzo thing. And like, I always just remember this episode as the Funzo episode.
Yeah. But Funzo doesn't show up until there are 9 minutes left in this 22-minute episode of television.
Exactly.
Well, not only that, Matt, you pointed out the fact that at the beginning of the episode, the sun is so strong that it's practically a laser beam, and 15 minutes later, it's Christmas. Now,
doesn't come up ever again.
Today, that's much more realistic.
Sure.
Just like this year, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Well,
I mean, I think you're touching on something that I was noticing, which is that the pacing is really terrible in these episodes. Like, it's really bad. And it happens to a lot of great sitcoms. Like, I think it happens in late Seinfeld, too. Those episodes are still funny to me, but, like, they're getting too outlandish. The plots are too big. We're getting off track here, guys. Like, pull it back in.
Yeah, this
it's a bit of a grab bag episode, for sure.
The episode feels cartoonish, which the earlier seasons of The Simpsons...
Cartoons are just a bunch of stuff happening, like stuff like that. It's just...
yeah, it doesn't have to make sense. No, but like, again, when we've been unpacking this idea of the show starting out as being, it was an animated sitcom. It didn't feel cartoony necessarily. Whereas an episode like this is very cartoonish. And I really like this episode and I enjoy it, but it's a far stretch from, the Mr. Bergstrom episode or like, or even that Christmas episode we alluded to where Bart shoplifts, which is full of heart.
It's very much a story. Back.
My favorite episodes are like Burns Baby Burns, You Only Move Twice, Lemon of Troy. And like, these are pretty esoteric concepts. They're pretty high concept ones. And so when I look at ones that are starting to fail for me, I'm always like, this is my fault. This is the slippery slope. Like, I got You Only Live Twice, and there's nowhere to go from here.
Yeah. It's like gentrification.
Yes, it kind of is.
I kind of want that nice coffee shop with like the espresso, but the neighborhood's getting so expensive.
Yeah,
right?
I know. Well, at least that homeless guy turned into a mailbox.
And all of that could have been avoided if the zoning disc wasn't worked.
Right. That's one of my favorite gags is the game of county seats. I felt very seen by that joke. That's like my day job blending into my hobby. The zoning disc is worked.
I like the like mass transit game she wants to play because that reminded me of this actual board game from my youth called Scotland Yard. And it was all about how like you were a cop and you were chasing Mr. X, the criminal, but you had to use a taxi or a subway or a bus. And so like the whole thing was like you have to anticipate where he's going to be and then find a way to get there before him. Wow. It's like, but the cops have their own cars. How is this a game?
I have never heard of that board game, but that's quite
probably people are familiar now with a game called Ticket to Ride. Which is like, okay, so it's the same kind of gimmick, but if you look at the image that they use in the show of the whatever mass transit game is, it looks exactly like the board from Scotland Yard. It looks exactly the fucking same.
Well, I will say, again, speaking to my love of this episode, at some point this week, I sent Nate a text of one of my favorite lines in the episode. I hadn't watched the episode yet, but I remembered, which is the exchange between Lisa and the teacher when she's like, fungus, funzo, Attila the Fun. Lisa, are you doing math? Just a few Venn diagrams. And then like Ralph interjects, there's more under her chair. So again, clearly this episode resonates with me if I can remember moments from it many years on. In fact, Nate, I don't know if you remember our very last year of high school, I did a Non-Denominational Holiday Fun Fest episode, or like so Matt, for context, we had our morning announcements.
No, this sounds really cool.
It's good. Yeah, we're really cool. Our morning announcements, we did like an actual radio show program.
I think every high school in America has experienced that. Yeah.
So we went to an arts high school, so very elaborate. And so I was in charge, and I said, wouldn't it be fun if for our last show before the Christmas break, we do it all live, because everything was always pre-recorded, so we were going to do everything live. And I interjected a bunch of clips from this episode as like our bridges. And so we ended our live broadcast with the Krusty the Clown like,
so have a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Kwezi Kwanzaa, a tip-top tet, and a solemn dignified Ramadan.
So
I don't
know if you remember that.
Now we'll bow to my gods, the sponsors.
Exactly. Right. So, okay. Well, I think we've talked enough about Grift of the Magi. Let's get into the Terminator. So, what we always like to do, Matt, as you're familiar with, we always like to ask the guests to sum up the movie in a sentence. So, how would you sum up the Terminator in a sentence?
Oh my God. If I was going to sum up the Terminator in a sentence, I would say that it is a landmark of American science fiction filmmaking and possibly the greatest debut film from a filmmaker since Citizen Kane.
Whew.
Okay. All right.
Even though it's technically not Cameron's debut,
I was going to say
from his first movie. I'm not going to engage in these semantic arguments with you. It is the first time anybody had fucking heard of James Cameron as a filmmaker.
Yeah, Piranha 2 doesn't really count.
But that's the cinephile in me. So I guess the movie fan in me would be like, this woman is stalked by a robot from the future. That's it. That's the log line.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, this is a surprisingly simple film, and I think that's what I appreciate the most about it. But we're gonna get into all that. So, Matt, what's your background with the movie? Did you see this or T2 first? Because I think for many people, T2 was the entry point. But you are a bit older than us, so.
I saw the Terminator probably a couple years after it came out in theaters. So it came out in '86. Okay. I was 7 when it came out. Mm-hmm. My parents, this is a sort of famous part of my psyche, my parents foolishly, unknowingly took me to see RoboCop on opening night in 1987. I was I was almost 8 at that point.
Okay.
And that movie kind of changed my life. I saw Terminator 1 on tape.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That makes sense.
But I have a very specific memory of seeing Terminator 2 on opening night in a theater in Virginia Beach, Virginia. There's a lot of personal baggage attached to that night, but it was one of the most electric experiences I've ever had in a movie theater, seeing T2 on opening night. Summer 91, I would have been 12.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's kind of the perfect age.
Yeah.
And it was basically the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my whole life. And like for a few years after that, there are many action movies, and I love action movies more than just about anything, that are very, very good movies that I completely dismissed out of hand at the time because they were not as good as Terminator 2.
Sure.
I mean,
Still a fair stance, honestly.
I've grown. I'm just saying. Like, but I've watched Terminator 2 like probably 400 times since 1991. And every time I watch it, I'm like, I can kind of just come in and out. Like, I've seen this, and then eventually, by the time it's over, I'm like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. It's so good.
It is kind of the definitive action movie of.
Yeah. It's one of the great,
at least of the
films.
90s, if not of all time. Like, it kind of sets the bar.
Absolutely. And I think there's a legit argument to be made. Like, first of all, I don't like to make comparisons. I don't like to do rankings. But as with Alien and Aliens, Terminator and Terminator 2, like, you have 4 masterpieces right there.
Yeah.
Like, some people like to say that Aliens is better or worse than Alien. I think Aliens is the scariest movie I've ever seen in my life. I think Aliens is one of the greatest action movies of all time.
Right.
I'm really glad that I have both of those, and I don't feel the need to, put one over the other.
Totally.
And Terminator for me is the same. It's like Alien to Aliens. It's like Terminator is so stripped down and so raw, and Terminator 2 is so big and so different that they kind of don't bear comparison. And I'm also glad that I get to watch both of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nate, what about you? When did you see Terminator for the first time?
I was trying to think back, and like, I know that I came to it late, right? That I know for sure. I obviously was very young when T2 even came out and did not see it in theaters. I think I probably saw Terminator 2 first and then went back and watched the Terminator a while later.
Yeah.
I think that was probably high school or maybe even college for me. But I was thinking about this. Probably my first exposure to anything Terminator was a video game called Commander Keen.
Hell
Which was, like a game I loved to play when I was young. And the opening credits to that video game are a parody of the opening credits to The Terminator.
Yeah,
you got
the sliding
the iconic sliding, like text sliding over each other sort of situation. I feel like that was definitely my first exposure to anything Terminator, but I don't remember the first time I watched this, but I will say I've watched T2 many, 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 many times, and I've watched this a few times. And I do think every time I watch The Terminator, I appreciate it more. I remember the first time I watched it, I'm pretty sure it didn't hit with me, but it was partly because my expectations were so misaligned with what it is, right?
Yeah, because it's not Terminator 2. It's not a giant action movie.
No,
exactly.
It's this very stripped down serial killer movie.
Yeah.
And like, it has so many tiny grace notes that you just aren't appreciating when you're young and you're like, I want it to be the big thing. I want it to be this. But like, it starts at the very beginning with like that little opening crawl that explains the future. They launched the missiles and like the final war will be fought now, here.
Yeah.
Tonight.
Yeah. Exactly.
And every time I see that now, it's like, fuck, I'm already in. You got me. You got me. There's a great moment where Michael Biehn wakes up from a dream of the future. Mm-hmm. He's asleep in an abandoned car, and he's had a dream of the future war. And he wakes up, and the first thing he sees is a construction crane with the tank treads. And every time that happens, I'm like, my heart breaks a little for him. It's achingly sad. But when you've just come off of Terminator 2 and you're 12 and you want to watch the other one, it's like, well, this isn't as funny. Like, this isn't as exciting and cool.
You mean there's no little kid in this one?
Right, yeah, exactly. It's like, well, stick with me here. Maybe that's a good thing. You know? But yeah, I mean, I love them both.
Yeah. Adam, what about you?
I was trying to think about this because I know I was very late to this one. And like, I think a lot of people of our generation, Nate, like saw T2 first. I vividly remember the Christmas my cousins, Scott and Matt, Scott listens to the show. Hi, Scott. They got T2 and Scarface on VHS. And they were going to watch them, and I wasn't allowed to watch Scarface. But Matt, who is a little bit older than Scott, he was like, oh, Adam, I'm going to show you a couple scenes from Terminator 2. And I was probably, God, I would have been like only like 4 or 5 years old. So like way too young to watch the movie proper. But he showed me a couple scenes and it just like blew my mind. And I was thinking about, I think the first time I saw anything from Terminator 1 was in grade 11 film class, because our first assignment was to create what Mr. Douglas, our film teacher, called a chase film. And he used Terminator as an example of a chase film.
Sure.
And so he showed us a couple sequences from that. And again, it would have been a pretty, like, a crappy VHS or crappy DVD copy. And I was just sort of like, wait, I'm like, what the hell is this thing? Like, it looks like garbage, and like this is Terminator. Like, this becomes Terminator 2. Like, how? What? So I didn't.
Kids had it so easy.
I know. So I genuinely don't think I saw it uncut. Like full. Sat down and watched the whole thing until like 2013. That's when I found it. I first logged it on Letterboxd, and I think that might actually be the first time I sat down to watch the whole thing.
Wow.
So like very, very, very late. And much like you, Nate, I went into it and my memory, like when we said we were going to do this episode, I was like, I don't know that I really want to rewatch this movie because I don't remember really liking it. And I was kind of blown away by how much I enjoyed it this time around, knowing what I was getting myself into and like really appreciating the simplicity of it, which we're going to obviously unpack all of that. But like, I realized, this is a slasher movie, and I love slasher movies. So if you take it on that terms and sort of ignore the T2 of it all and just like accept it for what it is, there's so much to love about it.
Yeah.
It's funny because I hate slasher movies.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Well, we're going to get into it then.
Yeah.
I think they're so samey and boring, and this is like cinematically on a whole other level.
I would agree with that.
For sure.
I would agree with that.
And to be fair, I like the slasher movies that manage to subvert the genre and become their own thing.
Yeah. This is transcendent. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny when I think about Alien and Aliens because I didn't have this like trouble with Alien and Aliens. For whatever reason, I was able to kind of appreciate both of them on their own terms. But I do think I saw Alien first, and then I saw Aliens. And I was like, oh yeah, this is like a great... We've talked about this in previous episodes. It's a great way to do a sequel. You just don't do the same genre.
Right.
You take the world, you take some of the characters, it's identifiably the same thing, and then you just do a completely different kind of movie entirely.
Yeah.
And I think then you're not stuck in the trap of like, well, it has to be bigger or it has to be more of the same stuff, right? Instead, you can just do something completely different. But
there's pretty much only one guy who has this figured out. He's nailed it down a few times, and I hate to say it, but it happens to be James Cameron. Like he's made 3 great sequels to 3 of the greatest movies ever made, and they are pretty awesome. I mean, I guess I would retract that a little. Avatar is not one of the greatest movies ever made, as much as I love it, but I think the sequel is like way better.
I agree. I think the sequel's incredible. And
I love them both, but that second one is like, holy shit. Like, you're going to make more of these? They're going to be better than this? Okay.
Well, all you got to do is give James Cameron access to more water, and you're probably in good shape.
Yeah, right? He's going to do fire with this new one. I don't even know how I'm going to feel about that. That's going to be crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, sorry. I'm a huge Cameron acolyte. Don't get me off on that.
No, that's okay. Before we go too much further, for those who maybe somehow still haven't seen The Terminator or maybe haven't seen it in a long time, let's do the plot synopsis, which, Nate, you got from the 1985 VHS. This was the number 2 most popular VHS of 1985. This is how that VHS describes the plot of The Terminator. In the year of darkness, 2029, the rulers of the planet devise the ultimate plan. They will reshape the future by changing the past. The plan requires something that feels no pity, no pain, no fear. They create the Terminator. A brilliant flash of light and an ear-splitting explosion mark the arrival of the Terminator, a cyborg, part man, part machine, sent to present-day Earth from the future on a deadly mission. His task? To kill a young woman whose life will have great significance in the decades to come. The mechanical monster from the future leaves behind him an unspeakable path of destruction. Nothing can stop the horrific Terminator. Ooh, that
sounds great. I want to watch it again right now.
That sounds like a great movie. Yeah.
Okay, but 2 things about this. Number 1, 2029. It's not that far off.
Yeah, that is maybe the thing that has aged the worst about this movie.
Well, I don't know. I think we can still get there. I believe in us.
I've watched a few movies recently for professional reasons that take place in the future at the same time as this Simpsons episode we're discussing. Like, I just wrote a 2,000-word essay on a movie from 1995 that takes place in 1999. And it's like, the future?
Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
So, like, this plays pretty good. If the movie works, it doesn't really matter about the dates. Like Blade Runner, that takes place 5 years ago.
That's true.
That is true.
The other thing that strikes me with this description that's interesting is they don't talk about the machines ruling the future.
That's true.
It seems like they really explicitly decided to avoid that. The rulers of the planet devise the ultimate plan. Are they like saving that so that when you watch it, you're like, oh, machines rule the world? Or are they like, that's not going to play with people who read this? Like,
I think they just don't want to have to explain AI on the back of a video box.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
I mean, they already have to explain cyborgs, so, you know.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's true, though. There are some choices that are being made here.
It just makes sense for them to go like, the bad guys sent the thing.
Right.
Like on the back of the video box for Star Wars, it probably doesn't go like, so the Jedi are an ancient order of
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, Nate, take us back. Talk us through, how did this movie come to be? How does a relatively unknown James Cameron, director of Piranha 2, The Spawning, create arguably the most important sci-fi franchise outside of Star Wars?
Yeah, so this is like a pretty famous story, I would say, right? So James Cameron, it's 1981. He's basically, trying to avoid being associated with Piranha 2. And Cameron has a fever dream, and he wakes up and he sketches it and shows it to his producer and future wife, Gail Ann Hurd, right? And this is basically how he describes the dream in the sketch. So he says, the first sketch I did showed a metal skeleton cut in half at the waist, crawling over a tile floor, using a large kitchen knife to pull itself forward while reaching out with the other hand.
Cool.
In a second drawing, the character is threatening a crawling woman, minus the kitchen knife. These images became the finale of the Terminator almost exactly.
Cool.
So it's like the monster is already basically invented right off the bat. And the rest of the movie is kind of just like built around that image, more or less.
Incidentally, a couple weeks ago, Gail Ann Hurd tweeted, or I think it was on Twitter, she was offering to give away free copies of the 4K. And in order to do that, he was like, tweet your favorite moment or memory from the first Terminator. And that is the iconic moment for me, the moment that sticks in my brain that I find to be the sort of like most compelling and disturbing is that final sequence with the torso, the relentless pursuit of Sarah at the end. This thing is unstoppable. It's unkillable. That to me is truly terrifying. So
Yeah.
Didn't win the disc though. So I mean, like,
Whatever then.
For me, the most indelible moment in the Terminator, and it's kind of along the lines of what you're talking about, it comes much earlier in the film, where you're mentioning how she's being stalked by this thing that is relentless. And there's this moment, it's a famous line from the movie where Michael Biehn is explaining to her what's going on. And he's like, it doesn't feel anger or remorse or pity, and it absolutely will not stop ever until you are dead. And she doesn't know that he's helping her yet. She doesn't understand that he's the good guy. Yeah. That's one of the things I love about the movie is like, as many times as I've seen it, it isn't fully clear that Michael Biehn is there to help her.
Totally.
Until the last possible minute.
He seems totally deranged. Yeah.
It's a brilliant
Even though
choice.
we know he's a robot from the future, like, we get all that shit. And it's probably that he's the good guy, because otherwise, why are we looking at him? But she has no fucking idea about this.
Yeah. I mean, is it like some kind of crazy delusion? Like, you don't totally know exactly. And I feel like it's also really playing off of like LA at that moment and Skid Row and like mental health and addiction on the rise and just the vibe of people you run into on the street. Like, I really think that's a huge part of what's going on.
There's a crazy moment that I feel like doesn't get enough recognition. It is early in the movie. She's at work. She's having the hell shift at the diner. And her coworker's like, hey, come check this out. These two chicks that are named Sarah Connor got murdered. And they're like, isn't that wild? You're dead, honey. She goes, you're dead, honey. It's like, why the fuck would you do that? It's such a great scene. You would never get that scene in a movie now. You never get it.
That whole restaurant sequence is amazing. I love all of the dialogue in that whole sequence. It's so good.
Just tangentially, there are a lot of movies that feature there are horror movies or action films that feature like a young female protagonist who's in a bartender, waiter, waitress, server, dancer, something. And like never once is their job good. Like it's always just a nightmare. It's a nightmare. I've worked behind a cash register for 22 years just at one place. And I can tell you that it definitely sucks, but it's not like a constant assault on my psyche. Like, hopefully that's not just because I'm male.
Well,
But
yeah.
I hate to break it to you.
I'm certainly not going to discount the option that it's because like women have it way hard, because they obviously do. I'm just saying, like, you never see a woman who's a waitress in a movie who doesn't f***ing hate it.
Yeah,
Totally. Well, it's like all about the vibe of just feeling like everyone might be out to get you.
Yeah,
and
I feel like they use it as shorthand for like, oh, geez.
Yeah, building the tension.
Her next movie, I think, was King Kong Lives.
Yes, it was.
I just rewatched a few days ago and is outstanding. It's so weird.
Oh, I like
it's
it.
bizarre. I mean, it opens with King Kong getting a heart transplant.
Fascinating. I'm already in. I love that. Okay, so Cameron and Hurd, they write up a treatment. They're shopping it around. They're kind of holding out for a studio that's going to let Cameron actually direct the thing and do it the way he wants to. And eventually they land at Orion Pictures. Now,
wait, wasn't it Hemdale first?
Yeah. I think Hemdale is also involved in the end as well.
Orion would have been the distributor, and like Hemdale probably put up the money.
Right. Orion has a lot of creative control in the process. So this is hilarious. Supposedly, it was actually going to originally be shot in Toronto.
Oh.
But then they deemed it too expensive.
Oh.
And, yeah. So they decided to shoot it in LA and basically use all of the guerrilla-style tricks that Cameron had learned from working with Roger Corman, of course, when he was working as
John
an art
Carpenter.
director. Mm-hmm. It dictates a lot of the way this movie works. Like, it's all shot at night. Even the interiors are shot at night. Like, all that stuff is very much just a lot of it comes from the budgetary part of it. They had to wait 8 months for Arnie's schedule to clear up. So Cameron storyboarded the whole movie in that period. He just kind of took advantage of it.
You can fucking tell.
Yeah.
You really can. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And if you ever go find his original drawings for this, they're incredible. And the original drawing he did of the Terminator's amazing.
And the storyboards barely deviate from the finished film. It's pretty exact. This is like born filmmaker stuff. It's just like, he does it because he breathes it.
Yep, totally. And as a fellow Canadian, Cameron also knew nothing about guns. So he actually went out and bought some guns and tested out the action sequences with a camera and his roommate before, again, in this period, waiting for the movie stuff to start. To just, even actually know what the hell he's talking about.
There's a famous movie review of The Terminator from a guy named Stephen Hunter. Have you heard of Stephen Hunter?
No.
I don't think
okay.
So.
He's kind of obscure. He was a movie critic, and he also wrote thriller novels about a character named Bob Lee Swagger. You remember that Mark Wahlberg movie, Shooter?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That's based on his novel. Anyway, he was a movie critic for the Baltimore Sun, which it might surprise you to learn was my local paper when I was a kid. And his review of The Terminator was basically just listing all the guns that were in it and how cool that was. Because he was a weird gun dude. And so it'd be like, this movie's pretty cool, but also there's a Benelli M4, and it's listing this stuff. So that tracks.
It's funny. I was watching the movie. I was watching the scenes with the laser sight, and I was like, when did laser sights become a thing? This movie popularizes them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no way. Okay.
Yeah, they existed before this, and actually they were at the LA Olympics right before this.
Right.
And I think one of the prop guys basically saw them, these cops with laser sights on their shotguns, and was like, that looks cool, and decided to put it in this movie. And then since then it became a big popular thing.
I mean, they do look cool. But
I always liked in the scene where he goes to the gun shop and you get to meet the wonderful Dick Miller. Is the gun shop guy, but he's listing off all the guns he wants. He's like, I'll take the 45 long slide with the laser sighting and stuff like that. Then he's like, when he mentions the future gun,
the plasma beam or whatever,
he's like, it's okay. So the thing that always makes me laugh about this now is that it's the Westinghouse M25 40-watt phase plasma pulse gun. And it's like, wait, Westinghouse made that? I just like that for fun, Cameron threw in it's a real company that made this.
Yeah, totally hilarious.
Okay, well, so the production was rushed. Obviously, it's low budget. but it like you can tell how detail oriented it all is, right? And that's I think that is very much Cameron. So basically, at the end of the whole process, I just thought this like said a lot about how it all went. Cameron tells this story about realizing that they were missing a shot. So he's sitting in the office at Gale's house, and he says, "I remembered that we didn't have a shot of the Terminator's boot outside a glass sliding door at night. So I put black paper tape on a production assistant's Bass Weejan's shoes. We used the sliding door at Gale's house, and I exposed the shot day for night so it would turn all blue and match the lighting that we'd done in the scene." And that scene's in the movie. Handheld, hunched down on the carpet, just a tiny glimpse of the Terminator's boot outside the door.
My guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a
So it's
similar
like, you know,
story in Escape from New York, which Cameron also worked on, where they didn't have a shot of Adrian. They didn't. Yeah, he drew the matte paintings of the skyline of New York City.
Oh, cool.
Shit, I love that.
Yeah, there's pictures of him painting that shit. And there's the scene in that where Adrienne Barbeau gets killed, and they didn't have a shot of her dead body, so they shot it in John Carpenter's garage. They were dating at the time, so
Right.
just like Gale and Cameron.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
exactly.
That's part of why this movie works, is like he knew exactly what he was looking for and kept track of shit like that, and then went to the trouble of actually fixing it when it wasn't quite right. So there you go.
Have you ever watched the behind this, like the making of special features on Aliens? It's like a 4-hour documentary called Maximum Firepower. Have you watched that?
Yeah. The Charles Lazaruco or whatever.
Yeah.
documentary.
That's insane. There's so much of that footage where he's like, "You're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. Put gloves on if you're going to operate the puppet." Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, the man, he knows how to do everybody's job.
So how does Stan Winston get involved? Because like if this movie is so low budget, like the thing that blows me away is how incredible all the sort of like puppet special effects are.
Yeah.
And how does a movie like was he buddies with Stan Winston and he was like, I'll do you a solid or something? Like how does that all happen?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how he got involved, but my understanding is this is like still relatively early in his career. Like, and I think this is like part of what makes him really take off is like the quality of the special effects.
Because it's stunning. Like even by today's standard, like there's a couple moments where like you can tell it's stop motion because it's too herky jerky. Or there's one shot, at least in the print I watched, where Kyle and Sarah are like running through a door and they have to slam it before the Terminator. And like
that shot is insane.
You could see the blue like matte outline. Like, it's very badly matted, but it's such an impactful moment. Other than like one or two moments, like I think that all of the special effects hold up.
As far as I know, he mostly knew Winston from, because he was a special effects guy. He was a set decorator, art director, matte painter, special effects guy. He met Bill Paxton building sets for Roger Corman.
Right.
Stuff like that. And Winston convinced him that you could do most of the Terminator robot effects in camera without stop motion.
Wow. Okay.
Most of them.
Right.
Right.
And
there's a couple shots. Yeah.
There's a lot of stop motion, especially at the end. There's a lot of stop motion.
Yeah.
But Winston convinced him that you could mostly do it with puppets and also rear screen projection. And if you look at Cameron's career from, let's say, Terminator through Titanic, it's riddled with rear screen projection and animatronics.
Yep.
Like
totally.
there's like look at Terminator 2. There's so much more rear screen projection in Terminator 2 than you would think, but like it's constant. Yeah. And like that shot you're talking about of it coming through the door, like that's a rear screen shot.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me.
Yeah.
Like the VFX in these movies are astonishing.
Yeah.
Not just
always
the CGI.
so collagey, like so many different techniques coming together.
Yeah. There's like a shot in the beginning of Terminator 2, the Future War part, where like the camera kind of pulls up and you see like all the hunter killers flying and the troops in the front shooting purple lasers in the air and the tanks and stuff. And it's like 5 different techniques all massaged into one big shot. And it's all analog stuff for the most part. And they just like, we used to make movies in this country.
Nate, we talked about this when it came to King Kong and how like some of the best visual effects in that are a combination of like different techniques. And then same with Bram Stoker's Dracula, a movie.
Oh, yeah.
I think has some of the best visual effects of all time.
A total masterpiece. What a great movie.
They're all super lo-fi, but it just, in the right hands, And I think Cameron's definitely got those hands. Like he knows how to combine stuff to really make stuff sing.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this that did remind me a lot of both King Kong and Godzilla. It's the same kinds of combinations of techniques, but the 90s version of it. Like, so it looks that much better. And there are like a few more techniques to draw upon and all of that. So that's the best that I know about Stan Winston. But, just looking at his filmography, it's like before this, he did like Heartbeeps. Well, that title.
Weird movie. Have you seen that movie?
No, but
you should see that movie. It will throw you for a loop.
All right. He did The Entity, Friday the 13th, Part 3, sorry, and The Thing. That's like all in the 80s, though. That's like just in the couple years right before this. And then looking back further than that, it's a lot of like more obscure stuff. He did The Wiz. That's a big one.
Right.
But yeah, like if you look at what he did after this, it's a lot more like movies that are quite well known.
Yeah. Okay, well, where do we want to start?
We're starting. We're just starting.
Well, yeah, I know, right? We got lots of places. Do we want to talk about the cast? Do we want to talk about the structure? Matt, what do you feel most passionately about here?
I mean, we've already covered my most passionate thing about it, which is the visual effects. I'm a visual effects junkie. Like, I love learning about all that stuff. And every time I watch this movie, I see something fun and new. But I mean, I think we got to start with the script. It's so pure. It's so intuitive. Like, it moves in an intuitive way. There's no point where even the implausibilities of the script creep up on you. It has so much momentum that you don't notice. Oh, you don't think so?
I don't know. I think I agree. I think it's one of those movies where after the movie's over, I start thinking about it. And then I'm like, wait a second. I don't know. The time stuff is kind of a little confusing. But in the moment, I just am not paying attention at all to that. So,
I wasn't getting into that. I want to talk about the structure. It wasn't until this rewatch where it kind of clicked for me. I was like, oh, this is just a slasher movie. This is a slasher movie with sci-fi elements, but I kept being like, this is giving me such Halloween vibes. A movie which, like, I think is a masterpiece. He's doing what Carpenter did with Halloween, but he's sort of like, how do I take my own twist on it? Well, I'll make it a sci-fi movie. And so, like, instead of it being this, like, weird masked killer, it'll be a cyborg from the future, and, like, he adds in all that sci-fi stuff. But what I will say is that there's a 20-minute chunk right around the 1 hour mark that the movie sort of completely
where the Terminator disappears from the movie when Poochie's not on screen.
Everyone should be asking, where's Poochie? And like, I think it's a combination of knowing where the series ultimately goes with Terminator 2 and then the sequels, which we may or may not acknowledge, that when they're doing the sort of like flash forward stuff, I'm kind of not really all that invested in it because like it's taking this break from the sort of frenetic constant chase that I'm like really into. And then it gets into the whole, like, I understand for plot reasons why it happens, but that friggin' Color Me Bad sex video, like, it is the corniest sex scene of any movie I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I'll give
you that.
I understand that it is not gratuitous in the sense that, like, we need it for plot reasons because we have to conceive John Connor. But
we probably needed it for financial reasons so we can get some tits in the movie.
That too, 100%. Like, if there's a reason that 12-year-old boys love this movie, it's because of Arnie and because of the boobs. But it is just, like, it's so corny. Like, it's so bad. And then, like, they get that out of their system, and then they get the great moment of, like, Sarah gets the phone call from the Terminator pretending to be her mom, and then he shows up and from that point on, I'm hooked right into the end. But there's this 20-minute chunk in the middle where I'm just like, this is starting to feel like a slog. What happened to the pacing? What happened to that frenetic, constant, like, driving energy?
So I totally hear you. You're not wrong. I will add that the gap in Terminator 2 is close to 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And it is the same structural gap. Here's the thing about my relationship with Cameron is that it is corny. It's kind of basic. He has this knack for making these galvanic, very basic stories. Like, it's not necessarily plot structure. It's that he has this ability to make these movies that we all recognize have corny shit in them. Like, you can't tell me that Avatar's not corny.
Right.
But
or Titanic.
Tremendously corny.
Or Titanic. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Famously corny shit. Like, the thing that everybody wants put back into Aliens is like, oh, she had a daughter who died. That's some corny shit.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, he has this ability to make these very galvanic stories very accessible to everybody, but also encompass, like, all of his other ideas. So, you're looking at the first version of that.
Yeah.
It's 1.0. It's more like 0.9. You know what I mean?
Yeah. He hasn't quite mastered it yet.
I'm with you, though. I don't like the sex scene in it. I think it's not that it's, like, you know, not necessary to the plot or, like, I think sex scenes are creepy. It's more just like, you're f***ing up the pace here, and I don't have time for this.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it's a very sexy sex scene is part of it as well.
Well, that's the biggest problem. Is it's just the most awkward.
But don't you think that that's maybe okay? I mean, like, he is conceiving his best buddy who, like, sent him on.
Yeah.
Like, is it supposed to be, like, hot?
I don't think it's asking us to grapple with that, though.
No.
Well, okay,
it's trying to
I'm not
paper
saying
that over as best as it can.
I'm not saying it's asking it to be hot, but, like, again, you're looking at this from 2024. It's 1984 right now.
Yeah.
It's 30 years ago or 40 years ago. Like, was the audience in 1984 in the theater going like, wait a second, that's kind of f***ed up? No, they weren't even paying attention to that.
No,
like,
no. And I recognize that. Again, it feels like
it gets in
it's
the
a
way,
corny
though.
music video. It feels like a corny music video, and that's what feels out of place. And you could have set up that they're going to bed now, and then like cut to the next day or whatever, and that would have worked totally
There's
fine.
a reason why Cameron doesn't do a lot of sex scenes in his other movies. Like, you know, of course, there's the Titanic one, but it does that, right? It kind of sets it up, and then you get the hand, and, you know, it kind of...
corny.
Yeah, but
I mean, also in Titanic, it's a love story, so, like, they're gonna bang.
It feels justified in Titanic, at least. Like, here it feels... It's this weird... And again, in an interesting way, I will say, going back to this idea of it being a slasher movie, like, Scream sets up the rules. You're in a horror movie, like, sex means you're gonna die, and, like... So there's...
But that's the interesting thing is, like, I think this is definitely playing with slasher tropes, but I don't know if I would call this a slasher movie.
It's a chase movie. That's what it is. It's a chase movie.
I agree with you that I would like to gently suggest that in 1984, slasher tropes weren't a thing.
Sure.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, still, you know, it was never a book of rules, right? Like, that was something that kind of Scream sets up. There were lots of tropes, but
the slasher genre was 5-6 years old relatively at the time. So, like, tropes, now we know what those were.
Sure.
That was 40-50 years ago.
Right.
That's valid.
But the common language, I guess, right? Like you said, I think a chase movie is a good way to think of it. Just the fact that Cameron's original drawing had a metallic skeleton with a knife, right? That in and of itself tells you a little bit of where his mind was going.
Yeah.
But then it kind of evolves from there. But I think, like, the big thing to me that's kind of missing from that formula is, like, there isn't really an ensemble cast of people getting picked off, like, even compared to, like, Alien, right? Or Aliens, where you have this sort of, like, group of people and some of them are kind of disposable and they go away, right? You don't get that in this. It is much more like this ongoing chase of the same characters throughout the whole story. So I feel like that's structurally a little different, but obviously, like, the Terminator himself and the sort of, like, relentless chase and then the coming back to life and all of that feels
and the final girl, which again,
the final girl stuff
later
absolutely.
on. But, well, okay,
which is a thing we all acknowledge now, but nobody said final girl in 1984.
No, that's a really good point, Matt. That feels like a really good segue, though, to talk about the characters in this movie and the actors who played them. Let's unpack that a little bit, because essentially, you know, yes, I know there's a couple other, but this is really about three people. You've got Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor, Michael Biehn as Kyle Reese, and Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator. So let's maybe just go in that order. What do we think of Linda Hamilton and Sarah? Big fans?
I have no notes. I think she's terrific in this.
Me too.
Yeah,
so good. She's just so good. And, like, that's a really hard character to play. I just spent time arguing that, like, you know, final girl tropes aren't real, but, like, it's her and Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah.
The way that her performance transitions from the beginning to the end of the movie is absolutely astonishing. Yeah. She's so good. And she has these crazy, like, gozer eyes the entire time. And she has Michael Biehn to play off of. You know, Michael Biehn's made a lot of indelible performances, and he's made 3 of them in James Cameron movies.
Yeah, I was going to say,
but also in some other stuff like Tombstone. He's great in Tombstone. Other things like
Tombstone,
that.
Yeah.
Like, his podcast is really good, too. If you watch that on YouTube, he's really fun. He's so good that she can only match him, and the two of them together, they have chemistry that's not romantic chemistry.
Yes.
Yeah. 100%.
100%. Yeah,
And
they're so good.
It's kind of like leaning into what you were saying, Adam, about like how the sex scene kind of feels extraneous and like out of place because their chemistry isn't sexual.
Yeah.
Their chemistry is antagonistic and scary.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is one of the only movies from its time where I can think of a male filmmaker writing a female character and being aware of how it must feel for her to be under attack.
Yeah.
As opposed to just it's girls so scared by a man with knife, you know?
No, but it's interesting that because you mentioned, Jamie Lee Curtis, but I think the person that we're also leaving out here who is very important and is obviously important in the arc of Cameron is Sigourney Weaver in Alien. Sure. And obviously all the remaining Alien films. Like, there is a through line there, and again, Cameron takes Ripley, who was originally not written as a woman, and then takes the fact that she was then turned into a woman for the ultimate version of Alien that we get, and he's like, okay, well, I'm going to run with this. I'm going to elaborate on that. I'm going to make that whole movie about motherhood and like the relationship between mother and daughter and all that stuff. So like, I think you're right. Like, I don't think there's many male writers writing for women in a way that Cameron seemingly is able to.
And without being it like, well, she's as tough as a dude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yep. It's not that kind of thing at all.
Even in T2. It becomes tough in T2, but my God, like,
but she's so vulnerable in that movie.
She's so vulnerable. Yeah, totally. And like, the bookends of those two movies, like, there's so many great things about those two movies as like a dyad, but like Linda Hamilton's performance in the two of them and the way they play off each other.
Oh, yeah.
Just amazing.
Like, it's crazy to me that Linda Hamilton didn't win the Oscar for Terminator 2. Like, she's incredible in it. And like, Sigourney Weaver got nominated for Aliens, so it's like, it's not like a precedent. And when I say vulnerable, I mean that like, there's a tendency when men, or maybe anybody, but specifically men, write women characters in action or thriller films, not just to make them as tough as a man, air quotes, as tough as a man, but to kind of like idealize them in a totally different way. Cameron lets Sarah be a bad mom. She's a bad mom. Mm-hmm. She's a bad mom for totally understandable reasons if you are positive that she's not crazy, which you and I should not be positive that she's not crazy. We only know because we're the audience. Yeah. But like, her son justifiably hates her guts.
Yeah. I mean, she basically becomes the Kyle Reese character, right?
Yeah.
Like she becomes the sort of crazy conspiracy theorist who might be right, and who has seen some shit, and that has a huge impact on their character.
Like, it's not accidental that after the initial shots at the beginning of Terminator 2, where we see like, LA getting nuked, that basically the first thing we see is her on video going like, I know what happens. You're all gonna fucking die. She's crazy.
Yeah.
You know? And apparently a lot of that came from Hamilton. She's like, I don't want to do this if I'm just like being chased by the robot again. Like, I want a new thing.
Well, but also that's the thing that I think is so brilliant. And like,
also he was married to her too. So
yes, he was married to her.
Perfect.
Two different times.
But like, the thing that I always think that horror movies or slasher movies kind of don't do a great job of grappling with is like, how do you grapple with like going through the experience of what they're experiencing? And I know that David Gordon Green Halloween movies try and kind of grapple with that for the Jamie Lee Curtis character to varying degrees of success. And the Scream series tries to do that with Neve Campbell's character, but this idea of like,
they've utterly failed to do that at all.
Yeah, I mean they attempted to, and then they hired other writers who didn't succeed, and then that's a whole other tangent. But this again, like, it's true. Like, how do you grapple with this? How would a woman who has been chased by a serial killer robot from the future, like, that's gonna mess you up? And I like that the second film has the sort of guts to like acknowledge that and not just paper over it and be like, no, she's a badass. I think that's maybe the difference between what Cameron does in Terminator 2 versus what he does in Aliens, is that I don't really feel like Ripley feels like someone who's traumatized by the events of Aliens.
Well, okay,
to the same degree.
Ripley doesn't start out as a waitress with a roommate.
True.
You know what I mean?
She's
like
a space trucker.
Ripley's a space trucker, and she's the one who is like, Don't let that fucking guy back in the spaceship, you asshole.
Yes, this is all. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
She's the
She's
only
sort of
smart
more like,
person
I
on
was
that
right,
ship.
and people didn't listen, and shit happened, and I'm still right.
She's always been a stubborn bitch, for lack of a better term. And that's what makes Ripley so indelible.
Yeah.
And like, the thing about aliens that I have friends that complain about this, they don't like aspects of aliens because they feel it reduces Ripley to a more feminine mother tropey character.
Right.
I don't necessarily agree. What I like about that version of Ripley is that this is the time where we see Ripley being tender. The scenes of her confronting Parker and Brett in Alien, where they're f***ing with her and like ejecting steam gas on her because they're mad and they don't want to work hard, and like she's fighting with the suits at Weyland-Yutani, like, did IQs just drop sharply while I was away? Like, compare that with like, I hope you're right, I really do, when she's arguing with the Marines at the briefing. And then when she finds Newt and she's like, oh, look, I made a clean spot. Like, he's adapting the character. He is changing the character in a way that's positive. I don't think it neuters her, for lack of a better term. I don't think it reduces that character to make her tender, to make her motherly, to make her, air quotes, feminine. This is a thing that he does really, really well. His women are fierce. Mm-hmm. They are protective. Look at Neytiri at the end of Avatar 2, like going full nuclear on everyone who's ever touched her family. You know what I mean? Like, people like to reduce Cameron's action movie female protagonists to like kind of this Joss Whedon Firefly Dollhouse Buffy kind of bullshit. Right. And they are significantly more nuanced, in my opinion.
I know. I think you're right. I think they contain multitude. They're not just kind of like, quippy badasses, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, we've managed to basically not talk about Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I was going to say, we should maybe talk about the titular character here.
Kind of wild. But yeah, maybe we should talk about Arnie.
Well, I mean, in a weird way, I think it's also kind of understandable because at the risk of alienating everyone, like, I'm not going to say Arnold's not good in this movie because he's.
Oh, come on, man! Don't even start.
I'm not going to say that, but he doesn't have as much to do as the other characters. He just basically has to be an unstoppable killing machine.
Well, okay.
Can we recognize that my guy has maybe limited range and he is expertly deployed here?
No, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that, like, just because he's not verbal doesn't mean he's doing nothing, right? I want to back up though and just like for a second talk a little bit about the casting of this role.
Yes, yeah.
I think it's
I know there's
context.
a lot of interesting stories around how Arnold ends up.
A lot of them are kind of apocryphal though. Like the O.J. Simpson thing is not really that true.
Okay. Interesting. Supposedly Cameron originally conceptualized the role for Lance Henriksen.
That is true.
Yes,
right.
I've heard that as well.
The drawings resemble Lance.
Right. And so, who other people would probably know as Bishop in Aliens, right? And ends up getting a role as a cop in this movie, a kind of minor role.
He's so funny in it, though, too. He's so funny.
He's so good.
His shit with Paul Winfield, it's like, can I get an Abbott Costello movie with these two guys? This is fucking funny. Abbott and Costello meet the Terminator at the police station. Amazing. It doesn't end well for them.
Yeah, exactly. We kind of get to see the end of that movie in this. But that version of the character, right, is completely different than the version we get because it's not just a casting choice. Cameron wasn't even conceptualizing the Terminator as the character that we get until he meets Arnie.
Yeah.
He's thinking the Terminator is a man in the crowd, someone that like no one's going to notice, a kind of infiltrator, right? They even use that language.
Objectively makes more sense than what we see.
100%. That's
Like when he gets Robert Patrick as the skinny cop in T2, It's like, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, even the idea that the Terminators are sort of conceptualized as an infiltrator unit that like looks like humans and we can't tell them apart. It's like, well, just look for the giant Austrian man,
jacked man made out of granite.
Like, can you imagine Arnold the Terminator coming back to your cave in the future war, going like, "I found a dog, we eat it tonight." And you're like, You look like you might be a Terminator.
Yeah, the OJ thing is basically like supposedly the president of Orion tried to intervene in the casting process and was basically like, I found the perfect guy. It's OJ Simpson. I saw him in a Hertz commercial. He's very athletic. And at that point, supposedly,
he's very well spoken.
Right.
Yeah.
Supposedly, Arnie was actually going to be the Reese role.
Okay.
That was like an Orion idea for the casting.
Okay.
I think they were like trying to capitulate to
Cameron.
Cameron. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Cameron met him. Again, this is another place where you get like competing stories. Arnie's basically like, I showed up and started talking about how I really wanted the Terminator role and how I'd play the Terminator and all that. And then Cameron's like, as soon as I met Arnie, I knew that he should be the Terminator and not Kyle Reese. Right. And so who knows like who was actually sort of like coming up with the idea or selling whom. But in the end, that's kind of how it works out. So.
I do want to back up a little bit, though, because, like, where does this fall in the context of Arnie? I mean, I know he's, like, discovered in the Pumping Iron documentary. He's literally, like, this practical human specimen.
Yeah.
But, like...
Conan the Barbarian is,
I mean,
is basically...
He'd done
the big
Conan.
fan before this.
Okay, so this is post-Conan. Okay. That's what I wasn't sure about.
And, like, so I think they had to wait because he had to do Conan the Destroyer. That's why the wait was.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Which is a terrible movie that I love very much.
Yeah, and then of course after this is when you get the ridiculous run of like Commando, Predator, Running Man, Twins, Total Recall, Kindergarten Cop, Terminator 2, right?
That's the masterpiece run that nobody has ever executed before or since, by the way.
Yeah.
Those are all masterpieces. Those are all great movies. Kindergarten Cop included.
Yeah, exactly, and pretty diverse. Like Twins and Kindergarten Cop in there. Total Recall even.
You didn't even mention Red Heat.
That's true. Not my movie, but I think I skipped a couple in there. But
I wish he was my dad.
I think he's doing a lot in this. We watched Westworld at the beginning of this year, and that role very clearly, I think, influenced the Terminator, right? But like Yul Brynner's doing a lot in that movie too, right? It's a very physical performance.
Yeah.
But it's like it's the head movements, it's the eye movements, it's all of that. And I mean, I watched Pumping Iron sort of in preparation for this, and it's fascinating because like Arnie really does see his body as like he is literally building his body, right? Like that was his whole sort of perspective on it, was that like it is an art, and like he looks in the mirror and is like, to get the right shape, I need to be building those muscles, and he even thought about that for like roles. Which is wild.
We talk a lot on this show, Matt, about like how context is important and how it's very hard to watch a movie in 2024 with 40 years of history taking place after the fact and trying to put yourself back in the shoes of an audience watching this movie for the first time. So I think part of what I am sort of struggling up against is that you've got Terminator 2 where you've got Robert Patrick, who to me feels far more robotic and machine-like than Arnold does. Arnold almost has too much personality in a weird way. Like it doesn't.
Well, that's interesting. Well, he has way more personality in Terminator 2 than he does in the first one.
Yeah, but I think about a movie like Halloween and how like Michael Myers is this masked killer that is completely devoid of emotion. Like there's that famous line of like someone asked, I think this is the right movie, but like someone came up to Carpenter, is like, how do you want me to play this? And he's like, I don't want you to play this with any emotion. You are emotionless. Your goal is to kill. That is it. And that's really scary to me. And in a weird way, it's like the humor and, when the janitor comes and
fuck you, asshole.
Like those moments of levity that give Arnie personality in a weird way makes him less scary for me, because it's like...
See, I feel differently. I feel like those scenes, they don't necessarily lend Arnold personality. I think that the humor is coming from this janitor doesn't know that that's not a dude.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, fair enough.
It can't read his emotional cues. It can't be like, dude, I'm fucking working here, man. He's like, okay, well, I will just shoot you with my Uzi. It's an it. It's not a he. It's not a person.
But I would say, too, like, unlike the sort of philosophy of this is a completely flat role, you're not a human, you're not anything, like,
he adds nuance to it, absolutely.
But also, like, the Terminator is trying to imitate humans, right? Like, very distinctly, that's kind of the whole point of the infiltrator unit, is to pretend to be human. And so it's sort of like, it's kind of trying to be human. I mean, that's the whole thing about the second one, right? Is like the kid teaches him how to actually be more human, and he's kind of, wooden at the beginning, right? And trying, but not really succeeding.
That's there in this one when he runs into the punks at the beginning when they're like, "Nice one for a walk, buddy," and he goes, "Nice night for a walk." Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what it is. Like, again, I'm by no means saying that Arnold Schwarzenegger is
Stop
in
being
this
wrong.
movie. No, it isn't. I think it's this interesting point of comparison. And again, part of it too is that, like, I saw T2 first, right? It's hard to go back in a weird way.
Yeah.
So
I think it is also like part of Arnie's star persona, right? All of his roles, he's a little bit off. And there's a lot of like unintentional humor in his roles because
come on, you don't.
Well, Matt, earlier you have to understand. Earlier this year, Nate and I were on a podcast where we were forced to rewatch Batman and Robin. So
that movie's awesome.
I love that movie too. Hey, Adam, what was my take about that movie?
Nate's take is that it is the best comedy of the 1990s.
Look, man.
I like that movie a lot. I enjoy it. I love to rewatch that movie.
I'm not going to argue that is a good Batman movie.
No.
But what I will argue is that they don't make movies that look like that. They never did before. They have not done it since.
Yeah, maybe there's a reason for that. But
that is a production design and VFX landmark. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Also,
it's something.
If there's a limit to my love for Arnold Schwarzenegger cold puns, I have yet to meet it.
Fair enough.
But like that end, I love the slightly like Commando, right? I mean, his performance in that, it's like it's a little funny, right?
It's absolutely 100% funny, man.
Yeah. And there's a bit of that in this too. Like he's scary, but there's also a kind of edge of humor that's a little unintentional in this movie, and then they learn to lean into it.
Well, okay, so that
Absolutely.
brings me to a question that I wrote in my notes when I was watching this that I wanted to bring up. Everyone knows the most famous line from this movie. Everyone quotes it.
I'll be back.
I'll be back. Yeah, like everyone can do. It's Arnold's most iconic moment. But why? Because in the context of the film, it's not that funny a moment. I mean, I get that he has very little dialogue in this movie, but I'm just curious, like, was that line in the trailer? Like, how did that line become Schwarzenegger's most iconic line of all of his films?
I think you're looking at it just minutely out of context. The joke is not in the line.
No, it's in the when the car smashes later.
Yes, it's in the follow-up. And so, like, the joke is like, oh my God, dude. He goes, I'll be back. And then this happens. And
but Encino Man quotes it. Like, it becomes this, like, cultural thing of, like, but why? Like, why is it that line? I don't know that we have an answer to it. But
I wonder if it was a cheer moment in the theaters.
It's absolutely a cheer moment in the theaters.
Because unexpected. The first time you saw that, you'd be like, holy shit. He just drove a car through. Like, I feel like it would have been surprising and very memorable.
I think we're all forgetting something really important. The initial appeal of the Terminator was not, is Sarah Connor going to get away? Mm-hmm. The initial appeal of the Terminator is like, I want to watch this big guy f up a bunch of shit.
Right, right.
And so, like, when he goes, I'll be back, everybody's like, yeah, he will be.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah, fair enough.
Right.
So, like,
right. And then he does something that you've never seen him do in the movie so far.
And remember, he's Conan.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
So, like, the whole idea is, like, we're going to watch Arnold Schwarzenegger f up some stuff. And, like, just because he's the bad guy doesn't change that. We also went and watched 10 more years of movies where the whole idea was Arnold is going to come to your house and f up your shit and you won't mind. Yeah. Like, Red Heat. Commando is basically, that's the entire premise.
Yeah.
You know, and Commando, like, honestly, I love Commando, but it's not a good movie.
No.
Like, it's kind of shitty, but, like, it is very thirst quenching.
Right.
And so, like, I think that's where I'll Be Back comes from. It's very thirst quenching.
Right. Fair. And then I think it's cemented by the sequel, right? I mean, like, that's...
I wish there was a Commando sequel.
No, the T2.
I had this idea that they need to make a Commando sequel called Commando 2 Matrix Reloaded.
Yes,
because his name is John Matrix.
Yes, yes.
Appreciate you. Thanks for letting me have that.
Yeah, no, that's good. I want to talk a little bit about the visual language of this movie, because I think that's this other thing that's really interesting about it, in that, again, when you compare it to the sequel and like sort of its place in history, and my memory of it was like, oh yeah, Terminator 1, like that movie kind of looks shitty, like it's shot on such terrible like film stuff. Well, no, this was my memory of it. And then I watched it this time and I was like, oh, my memory is completely inaccurate. Like, this movie looks great. So let's unpack that a little bit, and the cinematography and all that stuff.
Yeah. It's like a classic, really delicious stone soup situation, right? It's Roger Corman's School of Filmmaking, but like an amazing version of that, right? Where it's like they're doing everything on the cheap. They decided not to use Steadicam because it was too expensive, so there's shaky cam, right? It's like a handheld rig. That just adds to the whole feel of the movie, right? Shooting at night adds to the whole feel of the movie, right? They're using available light, but then they sort of augment it, so it's got this very like noirish kind of vibe to it. Yeah, I mean, I think it looks great. It looks great. Really high contrast too.
They're shooting on really fast film, just like Aliens, because we're shooting mostly at night, so we need to use minimal lighting, so it's really grainy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the version I watched was, again, because the 4K was not yet available, this was actually a fan-made 4K upscale that someone had paid a company to color grade in HDR. Like,
boo.
But it actually, I have to say, it genuinely looked, especially when you compare it to the other Cameron Blu-rays or 4Ks. I was sort of blown away. Like, again, my memory was this movie was like very grainy and drab and not very good looking, and I was completely inaccurate. And yeah, like Nate, as you said, the contrast, like its use of light and darkness, that again kind of gives it that like horror movie vibe at times that I was really, really vibing with. The sex scene notwithstanding.
You didn't like the cinematography in that one?
Yeah, the clasped hands in slow motion.
Yeah.
There are some weird uses of slow motion in this movie, I will say. But
I don't know. I mean, I like some of the slow-mo moments. Maybe not that one, but the scene in the tech noir, like the club, the very first time.
That is an incredible scene.
Yeah,
so good.
That scene rules.
Such a good scene. And like there's some slow-mo in that for sure. Yeah.
She's got a little Schweppes Club soda or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's so good. And she keeps looking at Michael Biehn. And she's like, that guy's clocking me. It's really making me uncomfortable. It's so good.
So much of that scene is just like them looking back and forth at each other, cutting back and forth, and like them, and then Arnie, and then them. It's so good. It's so simple, right? In the end.
There's those beautiful slow motion kind of wide shots of the club, and like the people who are listening to this can't see it, but like the shots of the dancers going like this.
Yeah.
While Arnold is in the background,
80s
and she's staring at them, and he like levels out his Uzi.
Yes. And the shot of the laser sight on her face and the expression on her face, it's just like, burned in my memory.
I also love the tension at the beginning of that scene where she comes into the club, and they're like, hey, $5. Like, she's trying to just like get out of a scary situation, and somebody's like, hey.
Yes.
Like, the tension ratchets up in this really believable, very granular, very grounded way.
Yeah. Totally. I always think of The Tenant and Rosemary's Baby, and like that's what I always go back to with that vibe of just that feeling of like everyone is out to get you. Totally. It's not even just the Terminator. It's like everyone in LA is kind of at least a little out to get you. But it just adds to that feeling of like you're persecuted by everything. I love LA in this movie. That you actually kind of get to see some of LA. And like, you get a Griffith Observatory scene at the very beginning of this movie, right? And I was thinking about this. I was like, Rebel Without a Cause has a knife fight in it at the Griffith Observatory. Oh. And I was like, I was wondering if that was like an intentional nod or just we're shooting in LA, you have to shoot at the Griffith Observatory.
Yeah, I think Griffith Observatory is a place that you can get a nice permit to shoot whenever you want to.
Yeah, fair enough.
And it's a nice location. And then they're looking out the telescopes and stuff. Nice night for a walk. It just sort of lends itself to the thing.
It looks great. I mean, you're in LA immediately, right?
Yeah,
and even just seeing the cityscape, you're like, that's LA. You also get like a nice Bob's Big Boy ripoff. I think that's kind of where she's supposed to work, is Bob's Big Boy.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
I forget what it's called in the movie, but of course, like Lard Lad on The Simpsons is also a parody of Bob's Big Boy. So you got that.
Just don't look.
Yeah.
Well, and of course, the Big Boy always reminds me of Austin Powers. So I can't.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Always makes me think of David Lynch.
And David Lynch, yeah.
Have you guys ever actually eaten at a Bob's Big Boy, just out of curiosity?
I have not. I've eaten at other great, California diners, but not Bob's Big Boy.
Sure. I'm just saying, Bob's Big Boy was not a California thing. You could go to a Bob's Big Boy. Anyway, never mind. Just, dating myself. That's all.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on the future war sequences, because obviously, my memory is that we get a lot more of them in T2, and obviously the production value is much higher in T2. But considering the limited budget, what Cameron's able to do here, do you think it works, or does it sort of...
Oh my God, I think it looks incredible.
Me too. I think it holds up, amazingly.
Those skulls that he's crushing, they're this big.
Yeah, I know. The forced perspective stuff in this movie is
so
bonkers.
good.
Yeah.
The first shot of the movie is the treads going over the skulls. What an image.
Yeah.
What an image that nobody had seen.
Yeah.
And think of all of the things that image echoes. And I don't want to get specific about it right now, but it echoes a lot of ideas, a lot of historic things that have actually taken place. Mm-hmm. And he's going to open his little movie like that? That's pretty intense. There are a lot of movies that come out even now that are pretty good movies, but they don't have really arresting images.
Yeah.
And the Terminator is full of moments, shots, ideas, images that kind of make you go oh gosh. Even if they don't look great, even if the VFX aren't up to snuff or whatever, even the shot of Reese and Sarah coming through the door and the rear projection Terminator slamming the door in his hand, it's that's shocking.
Yeah.
When Gail Ann Hurd sort of put that question out, that's what makes it such a fascinating question, is because there is so many moments and iconic images to pick from. So to see what is the thing that resonates in people's minds. And there were tons of different answers. Obviously I'm not the only person to be the end when the skeleton chased her. But
right. But yeah, of course. That's amazing.
Yeah. The other thing about the forced perspective in this that blew my mind when I was looking this up a little bit. So the car chase at the end, right, with the big tanker and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That shot of the tanker exploding is
That's
a miniature.
Yeah. They shot the miniature exploding and they're running away from a rear screen projection. Yeah.
Right.
No, it's incredible. Yeah, it's absolutely incredible.
It's you would never know today that is not a full-size truck exploding. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Have you looked at the shot in Terminator 2 recently where they're in the LA River chase, the big truck chase at the beginning?
Yeah.
And Terminator comes up and picks up Eddie Furlong and lifts him onto his bike.
Yep.
That's a rear screen projection shot.
Wow.
Damn.
That's wild.
Yeah,
That's so wild.
It's insane.
I will say it's what's interesting. One of the problems that HD and 4K creates is that sometimes miniatures, you can kind of tell now that they're oh yeah, that's even Alien. There are moments in Alien or moments in Star Wars where it's just the image is so clean that I can tell that what I'm looking at is, and I don't think there's any moment in this where I would have clocked that. Obviously, the exoskeleton of the Terminator, not
That's
all of
a
those are going to be
puppet,
full size. That's got to be a rod puppet or that's stop motion or whatever. But no idea that tanker moment was fully miniature.
Can I gently suggest that just because you see the seam, that it doesn't mean that the image isn't...
Oh, no, absolutely not.
We've talked about that a little bit on the podcast, too, of just a lot of the stuff it's a magic trick, right? And and
I mean, it is called willful suspension of disbelief.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
Right. And even if you do kind of recognize, we talked about this a lot with King Kong, because it's King Kong, obviously it's you don't think it's a giant ape. It doesn't look like a giant ape.
Right.
But the artistry of it is still really, really impressive. Yeah. And that's the same with some of the stuff in this. I think, certainly the stop motion, it's it takes me out of the movie a little bit, but it's still really impressive, right? And and especially
I hate that phrase, it takes me out of the movie.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing or a deal breaker in a movie.
Yeah.
But it does call attention to itself, right? And I think it's just a different viewing experience than the tanker, where it is seamless. You would never know.
It's the thing that our film teacher used to always say, Nate, of the moment you are taken out of the movie, it's actually a moment 10 minutes earlier that broke it for you. And this is just, you were already out of the movie and now you're noticing things. It's rarely the thing you think it is. It's like something's failed earlier down the line to cause you to be distracted enough that you're paying attention to those sort of things. If you're in it, you're not noticing.
This is a thing that
stuff.
does not happen to me.
Okay.
I mean,
it literally just doesn't happen to me. Like, I don't get taken out of the movie. I'm always aware of the artifice of the movie. The artifice of the movie is part of the thing that I'm appreciating about the movie.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if the artifice is really good and I can see the seams, I'm like, that's nice. I like the seams.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen Aliens 500 times. I like that I can tell how it's done. I like that I can spot the seam there.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
I actually think that the new versions of it that erase some of the seams, I'm like, I can't see the matte line there. That sucks.
Yeah, I feel you. And I mean, like, you know, some movies make me giggle, right? Like, watching The Thing makes me giggle.
Oh,
and
it's
like
hilarious. That movie's really funny.
but not even the humor of it, but I'm just like, I'm watching it and I'm like, holy shit. Like, they built that stuff. Like, that's incredible. Yeah, the tentacles, the face splitting, like, you know, it's just, it's an incredible feat of artistry. And, like, that makes me giggle. The Mission Impossible movies make me giggle. When I see some of those stunts, and I'm just like, oh my God, like, that's the Burj Khalifa. He climbed the Burj Khalifa. Like, you know, and so I feel like there are moments in this, too, where I'm like, I find myself being like, wow. Like, just, you know, I mean, the ambition and the fact that they pull it off and the artistry that went into
For like
it and all
$8
of
million.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the craziest part.
Exactly.
Well, that seems like a perfect segue into the question that Nate wanted to ask, which is, what is your favorite action sequence? You know, like, there's so many great action sequences in this that might make you giggle,
movie?
Nate.
In
this specific movie. Yeah. Like, do you have a favorite or the one that sticks out to you the most?
The big truck chase that culminates in that incredible rear projection shot of Sarah running away from the exploding truck.
Yeah.
With this beautiful rear projection VFX shot. It's incredible. Like, what he's able to realize with relatively little money that was so galvanic. It's hard to think about stuff like this that's become IP.
Yeah.
But, like, when Terminator came out, intellectual property was not a word. You know what I mean? Like, that's not a term. And, like, these very iconic images, the robot emerging from the flames, it's limping, it's chasing her. I mean, like,
good.
I'm doing the move now
Yep.
in our video window, but you know what shot I'm thinking of.
Totally.
Yeah.
These indelible images, they seared themselves into people's brains. So much so that now there is a significant chunk of the creative community that is available to us that only wants to recreate that idea.
Right.
Those images. They keep coming up with narrative and cultural ideas that can maybe make us sort of slightly re-experience that tension. But the image is the image. We can't resolve it.
Yeah.
It's over.
Yeah.
It scared us one time. It's still scary. You can't go like, well, it'll be scary like that again.
Right.
Like that new Alien movie, which is not a terrible movie. It was fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everybody gets mad about the Ian Holm thing, but whatever. That is what it is.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that, like, there's the shock of the new and then there's the aftershock.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that sequence, of course, ends with the Funzo moment.
Yes. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Which is, you know, again, one of those indelible images of just like, I mean, it's amazing in this movie of just watching that skeleton come out of the fire is like cinema. It's just amazing.
It's horrifying. This is a movie that's so good that it lets you get away with.
You're a terminated fucker.
yes,
Like-
yes.
That's a line that's too corny to work.
It is so corny, and yet you're
Absolutely.
totally buying.
When she
into
takes
that.
the time to say it, like
Yes.
nothing about it is it's super cheese, but it
Yeah.
works.
Yes.
Nate, what about you? What's the action sequence for you that sticks out?
So the one for me, this is like not a fun one, but it really drove home the horror aspect of this movie for me, and it was the police shootout, which I think hits differently now than it did in 84. I was like, I was looking back at like context, right? So where were we with mass shootings back in 1984, right? Sorry to bring us down here, but really, like, it was interesting.
It's interesting how there are not 500 million police officers chasing them. Yeah. Instead of just like a few cars.
Yeah.
They would not have made it to the factory.
Right. So 66, you have the tower shooting, Texas tower shooting, which is incidentally parodied on The Simpsons. Kind of wild.
That one's Homer. That one's Homer.
Yeah, exactly that. So you have that. And then, like, the same year, you have a big mass shooting out of McDonald's in San Diego.
Oh, wow.
Right. But after this is when you start getting a spat of the postal workers that committed these mass shootings, where we get the term going postal. And that's sort of the beginning of these workplace shootings. And then you have school shootings, of course, with Columbine and all of that. So it's like this idea of someone walking into a police station with automatic weapons and shooting people doesn't mean the same thing when this movie comes out. Right.
It's way more shocking.
Right.
In 1984.
It's way more shocking, but it's also kind of more abstract in a weird way, where you're kind of like, this is like an imaginary thing.
Yeah, this is
and
an
now it's like, this is something that happens all the time.
Yeah,
it happens multiple times a year.
Right. If you heard about it tomorrow, you'd be like, yeah, that tracks. I can imagine that happening.
Yeah.
Right. It meant that, like, watching that scene, it felt a lot more real to me rewatching it this time than it did the last time I watched it, when I guess I just wasn't thinking about that much. But it's scary as hell, that scene. It like bumps up against the sort of I'll be back part of that, of like Arnie tearing shit up. But when he was walking around, like stalking through the hallway, turning into a room and just shooting everyone and then continuing on, I was like scared, like it was hitting me differently. So I thought that was interesting. And apparently the movie's composer was talking about this scene. And originally when they escape, he had written like a riff where it brings back the heroic theme, and it's like, da da da,
away.
And James Cameron saw it and was like, no, absolutely not, take it out. And he wanted to stay in the anxiety of the moment,
right?
Which I thought was really interesting.
Good choice.
It makes it more of a horror scene and less of an action scene in some ways.
Yeah,
and he backs off on that in the second one, where it's like all the cops show up at the Cyberdyne building, and it's like, well, we're not going to kill anybody this time.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, because I think he said in retrospect,
how many of them?
Yeah,
all of them, I think.
Right. Yeah, I think he said in retrospect that he sort of regrets fetishizing guns in this movie and in the next one. But again, I would say, like, it's pretty scary. Like, it's not Commando.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%.
100%. Anyway, Adam, what about you? Do you have one that stands out for you?
I mean, I mentioned that, like, the moment, that whole final chase for me is the winner. But just because we've been talking about it and I was thinking about it, there's a chase in the middle of the movie where...
Out of the parking garage?
Well, they're in the truck and he's pursuing them on the bike.
Yeah,
She knocks him off the bike and then he gets hit by the big rig and then they flip their car. And I just remember watching it this time and being like... when their car flips, being like, whoa, like that's visceral. That crash, for whatever reason, however Cameron shot it or whatever, it didn't feel like a stunt from an action movie. It felt like a real...
like an accident. Yeah.
It's just his control over these set pieces and the emotionality that comes out of them is... It's unlike what you normally get in an action movie. Like, and most action, it's like action for action's sake, whereas like everything here feels like it's justified and it's to drive home this feeling that he wants you to experience. It's like, well, how are they going to escape this? How are they going to escape this? How are they going to escape this? And he just does that so well.
Yeah. I was finding, I have to admit, the car chases, I was just thinking about T2 the whole time.
That's the only thing is like anytime the big rig is on screen, I'm just like, well,
until that finale. The finale's killer,
yeah.
But some of the actual car chase parts, I'm definitely thinking about T2.
I kept thinking about how Michael Biehn throwing those pipe bombs and just the terrible aim, and also being like, this doesn't feel practical, dude. Like,
well, that's improvised, But also that leads to the part where he's about to throw the bomb and then he gets shot and it blows up next to the car, which again, like you were saying, it feels really dangerous. Like it doesn't feel like an action movie thing. It feels like, oh, holy shit, that pipe bomb like blew up right next to him. Like, is he alive? You know?
That level of anxiety is not something that a lot of action movies are able to achieve.
That's what I mean. Like Matt, you said earlier you're a big fan of action movies. They're not my favorite genre because ironically, like I find them to be very samey and that.
No, they are. That's 100% true. It's just my preference is for that kind of thing.
Totally. And there's almost like a lack of emotionality to them. It's just like it's set piece after set piece after set piece. Now, again, I love James Bond movies.
That's why Cameron is the genius.
Exactly. And that's what I think. Again, coming back to this movie and thinking in my mind, I'm like, it's just a generic action movie. And then realizing, no, it's not. Like, it's much stronger. There's so much more going on here.
And, like, the thing about your James Bond movie thing, I'm with you. And James Bond movies aren't asking that from you.
No, no, exactly.
But
and I know that
Cameron is absolutely asking that from you, and he commits. He's like, I'm asking... and I am going to deliver my promise.
Yeah. And he's very sincere about it. Yeah.
Yes. It's absolutely not a joke. Like, he is going to make you feel sick about this.
100%. Yeah. I feel like we're getting close to the ending, but before we do, I do want to touch on something that I imagine is going to be a controversial take, especially with Matt in the room.
You're just, like digging your hole.
I don't know. Maybe it's not a controversial take. We're about to find out. But I want to talk about the dog shit score in this movie.
What the fuck is wrong with you? Jesus Christ. Did you just say that the score in the Terminator is bad?
I think the themes in the Terminator are excellent, but the cheesy synthy sounds like it's playing.
Sorry, man.
At times, I thought I was listening to the music from Doom. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me.
I love it.
I'll tell you the truth. I love the main Terminator theme. You know, like right.
That's great.
Everyone loves that. I think it's not as good in the sequels. I like the Casio version in the first movie. That's the version.
Yeah,
I like the title sequence.
The Casio score of this. It's perfect. It's so lo-fi.
I'm into it too, I have to admit. At this point especially, it feels kind of retro-futuristic in that way. Like it's, it's the 2029 of 1984,
This is a little movie. It's a small movie. It needs to feel gritty and yucky. And like, we didn't get what we wanted. That's the thing about the Terminator.
I knew this was going to be controversial. And like, let me be clear. And I hate to keep bringing it back to
Do you think that the original Terminator would be what it is if Cameron had gotten exactly what he wanted?
No, not at all.
It would have sucked.
Of course. I think limitations are important. I don't want to keep hammering on Halloween, but like, I love the Halloween score, and that score is incredibly simplistic.
Iconic.
But there's just something about the instrumentation of this score in moments where it's so corny. It doesn't match the vibe that the film is going for and wasn't working for me.
I'm sorry that you feel that way. I don't agree. I do think that this might be an age issue for me. Where it's just sort of like I'm used to things not feeling like sometimes they're a little incongruous. But I like the rough stuff. I like when things feel yucky and edgy and they aren't really coming together.
And this is the other thing too. I've also been like catching up on a bunch of Hitchcock movies that I hadn't gotten around to seeing over the years. I very much feel like have this same problem of like, there will be moments where it's like a jaunty like 1940s style kind of score, and then someone's going off to be murdered. Like it's just this like.
Well, that's
so
Hitchcock. That's Hitchcock being cheeky.
Well, but
which I don't love either.
But you know what I mean? Like, so I have this thing on my brain of like, I'm noticing scores where it's, I hate to use the expression in front of you, Matt, but it's taking me out of the moment because I'm so aware of them.
Yeah, you're watching a movie, right? Like, you're sitting on your couch, you're watching a movie, right?
Of course.
I didn't have that experience with this score. So it's not just an age thing. For me, it does work. And also, like, the melodies go a long way for me, right? Like, the very distinctive elements of this score. There are so many scores that don't have that, right? Now, especially, where it's like you couldn't hum it, right?
No, of course. That's why I say
you can't imitate it. But, like, that's one of the amazing things with the score to me is that, like, you can imitate the beat to it, the heartbeat, right, of the Terminator. That's basically what it's supposed to be.
I would argue that the score in the first one is way better than the score in the second one, which feels very innocuous and doesn't really push you.
Yeah.
But the score in the first one absolutely pushes you.
At the very least, it invents the key elements that become so iconic.
I think the themes are strong. I think there's the instrumentation and like, I can't remember what chase it is, but there's one specific chase where it was just like the scene is so gritty and like awesome, but it just has this like honking, like MIDI.
No.
Doom 2 score.
It's the big middle chase where like they're in the parking garage. And they're coming out, and the cops are chasing them, and it's like
what is this?
Yes, it's a little broad, it's a little generic. I mean, I think it's what they could afford, it's what they had. Yeah. But also, like you're saying, the big themes are so iconic, and I do think that they are more emotionally fulfilling than you will see in later iterations of that music. I don't think the score in Terminator 2 is as exciting, is as instrumental, elemental as it is in this movie.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to resolve on this one.
No, we don't. We don't need to.
Okay, so let's talk about the ending. It's actually a really interesting ending for a movie like this, in that it's a nice little grace note where it's small and it's quiet and there's a storm coming, and like the photo is taken and. Well, Nate, I'll let you. I don't want to steal your great line that you have written in our notes document, but
oh man, I can't wait.
Well, it's just this is where the time travel stuff kind of like comes to a head, where you're sort of like thinking through the ramifications of what has happened, which is basically like it's kind of a reverse Back to the Future situation where your son gives you a photo of your mom before you meet her to make you fall in love with her. And then sends you back in time to have sex with her, basically. Right?
See, here's the thing that I don't get about this is you're completely right. That's absurd. Where did he get that fucking photo?
Well,
did she give it to John?
Well, so this is the thing, is that she tells John, like, I think it's implied that she gives the photo to John, she's recording these messages for John, and then basically says, here's who your dad is. I met him because you sent him back in time to me.
So he goes back in time knowing he's going to her.
I guess so. It's not clear whether Kyle Reese knows, but John Connor definitely did.
Here's the thing. If you're Kyle Reese and you live in the future war and you're eating cockroaches and you're like, look, we're going to send you back in time to fight a Terminator solo, which is basically an unkillable monster, but you might get to have sex one time. I'd be like, let's go. I've never had sex before. I grew up in the future war. I would like to get laid one time. I'd be like,
the 1980s sound pretty good by comparison.
Yeah, it's worth it. It's worth it. That would be nice. Yeah. And she's going to like me? Yeah, yeah.
Well,
apparently.
Maybe.
Final 30 minutes of your life, she'll come around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, we're going to cut you out of the sequel. We'll film you, but we're going to cut you out.
But it's such a great ending. I mean, really.
No, it is. It really is.
Oh, man. She has the dog.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I go to a lot of press screenings, and I went to a press screening of Dark Fate, which is, probably relatively one of the better Terminator sequels.
Yep. Agreed.
Not a great movie, but it has its moments. Yep. And I remember really thinking it was hilarious, like laughing out loud when it turns out that Terminator has a dog.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And then one of my fellow critics yelled at me for laughing too loud at that screening. He thought I was performatively laughing to say that I thought I was like above the movie. I'm like, I just thought it was funny that the Terminator had a dog. I thought that was a nice joke.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's nice. The dog is nice. And you can see just in that one scene how much she's already changing from the experience as well, which of course, comes to a full head in the next movie, but like.
And I love that beautiful matte painting of the clouds.
Totally.
It's gorgeous. Yeah. It's gorgeous.
Totally.
We used to make movies in this country.
That last shot apparently was super like last minute stuff. It's not Hamilton in the shot. It's not the dog in the shot. It's actually Heard's dog. Heard's mom's dog. There you go.
Yeah.
And apparently a cop actually stopped them when they were shooting and was like, do you have a permit to shoot? And they claimed they were UCLA students doing a student film.
Amazing.
It's beautiful.
Love that.
Well, I think the thing that I love about it is that, I mean, obviously I know that we get Terminator 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, 6, 7, but there's a finality there. But like all great movie endings, it's like everything feels wrapped up, but there's that opportunity for more, and you as an audience get to go home and be like, oh, like what happens next? Like, how is she going to stop this future war? Like, what is that? Yeah. What is the ramifications of all this? And then thankfully, like, Cameron, a few years later, gives us T2 and we get to see how it all plays out. Nowadays, every ending has to be open-ended enough because they want to have sequels. So it's like, you can't ever have an actual end to a movie, which is so f***ing annoying. So I like that this movie actually has a proper ending, but it is an ending that at least leaves things open enough that you could make a sequel or 7.
Well, I think that we're used to the movie telling us what might happen next. And I think that what we're missing is just the simple pleasure of what if it's not over?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Just an open-ended ending instead of a tease for the next part.
Yeah. There's something airless about telling you where we're going to go next. And there's something very breathable and something very actionable about what are we going to do now? What happens next? What are we going to do? What do I do
It's
now?
funny. It's one of the things I love about the original James Bond movies. I mean, I like the Daniel Craig movies a lot, but...
No, you don't.
No, I do. The thing I don't like about them is that they're actual sequels to each other, and the MCU
is the thing you don't like is that they let that twerp.
Well,
we do not have enough time to unpack how I feel about the ending of No Time to Die.
That shit.
What I was going to say is that, the James Bond movies all end with an ending, but then they give you that title card of James Bond will return.
Right.
So it's like, I know there's more coming, but this story is over.
And all you get is like a title that could mean usually almost anything.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
To your point, Matt, like that's what I miss is like, just end the story.
Yeah.
You can make more stories, but just end this story.
There have to be other Terminator stories that don't revolve around Sarah Connor and John Connor.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that this movie has like a proper actual ending.
Well,
then
there's also the terrible director's cut that has the like future old woman makeup.
Right.
Right. I don't know about this.
Yeah, where she's sort of like satisfied in the future.
There's a cut of Terminator 2 that has like Sarah Connor watching John swinging on the swing set, not getting nuked when she's an old lady makeup.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But it's like a much more definitive, like everything worked out okay ending.
Right.
Versus like this one's the future war is coming, but she knows, and we know John Connor will survive long enough to send Kyle Reese back. Right. And like that's kind of all that's guaranteed is like the future that Kyle Reese comes from, where they're fighting the machines and have turned the tide. That's the future they're fighting for, right? Not like the machines never happen, right? In this movie, at least. So that's part of what's interesting about it is like, the future war is going to happen. The storm is coming.
And I think that that's the thing that makes the only tolerable Terminator sequel before Dark Fate, like, which is also mostly tolerable. Like, I have nice things to say about Terminator 3. That's all.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't think it's a good Terminator movie. I do think it's a good sci-fi action movie.
Yeah.
But yeah. They should have stopped then. It's like, well, we couldn't stop it. We all died. That's the end of Terminator.
Well, that brings us to the part of the episode we call the parts that seem like Simpson jokes but aren't. Is there anything in this movie that while you were watching it, you were like, well, that's kind of Simpsons-y?
There were two ones that sort of jumped out at me. One was the scene where she's, having her like shift from hell at the diner, and the kid puts a scoop of ice cream in her pocket, which is such an amazing like little detail in this movie that is so funny. Like at times this movie is absolutely hilarious, and that is one of those moments. But kind of felt like a little detail you might see in the background of a
it's very much got like an Uncle Moe's Family Feedback vibe to it.
100%.
Please take the basket off my head, kid.
It's extremely hot. And then the other one is a little one, Pugsley the iguana. Right?
Jub Jub.
Oh yeah,
Jub.
He's everywhere you want to be.
Yeah, exactly. For me, it was the punks at the very beginning very much had like Simpsons bully vibes.
Snake and Kearney and like
Paxton's Jimbo and like exactly. Like I totally would.
I love that you single out Paxton as Jimbo.
You think Paxton's Jimbo? Yeah, I guess I can see that.
I think he would have to be Jimbo.
Well, he's the only one with hair.
Yeah. So
right by default.
Yeah. Well. He's not Kearney, so...
Yeah.
And then the other thing I noticed was just, like, it's not really a joke in the movie, but when I saw it, I couldn't help but laugh because it made me think of this Simpsons joke, is at the end, there's a shot when Reese gets out of the garbage bin, and it is a Rubbish Co. dumpster. Which just reminds me of the gag in the Auto Show when Bart's like, "Oh, you're living in a dumpster, man?" He's like, "Oh, I wish. The dumpster brand waste disposal units are beautiful. This is a trash co." So it made me chuckle
Rubbish
because exactly, rubbish, and it's just the fact that like that's actually written on the thing. Like it's probably one of those details that I'm only seeing because I'm watching it in 4K, but you know. In the theater in 1984, no one was paying attention to that. But yeah, Rubbish Co. is just very funny to me. So, Nate, how did this movie do? I mean, that's a dumb question because
it did
kind of know. But just because it became a massive success doesn't mean it was a success out of the gate. So how did this movie perform?
And it is kind of interesting because it is the first in the series as well. So basically, the important context, Orion hated this movie, it seems like. They got it, and they were like, I don't get it. This is bad. This is going to fail. We're not going to invest in this. So they don't really promote it. They dump it at that time, not a good time of year, in October, sort of between the summer and the Christmas season, right? But as it turns out, of course, like, you know, the critics were kind of mixed on it, but the audiences love it. Budget is $6.4 million. It makes $38 million. The multiplier is really good, but it's not. Well, let's find out. Where do you think it fell in terms of like the top of the year?
Oh, if it placed,
this had to have been in top 10 of that year. It was a cultural phenomenon. No,
it wasn't.
I'm not surprised by that.
Well, it's all relative. Like it did really well for its budget, but it did not place in the top 10. So I'll run through the top 10 very quickly for you. Adam, we've done this before for another movie on the podcast.
Karate Kid?
It'll become apparent in a moment.
Okay.
Okay. Ghostbusters. Right?
Yeah, right.
Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Gremlins. Yep. The Karate Kid.
Karate Kid, yes.
Police Academy.
Oh, dear
which you've
God.
also done.
We've covered it twice.
Yes. Footloose. Beverly Hills Cop. Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. Terms of Endearment.
I'm surprised Beverly Hills Cop was that low.
I know. It's always interesting to look at these because it is so relative. So Terms of Endearment and then Romancing the Stone is number 10. So this movie...
I mean, Ghostbusters was...
Yeah, it's
gargantuan.
Insanely huge.
And Ghostbusters and Gremlins came out the same day.
Yeah, it's so crazy.
Can you imagine? Well, Matt, you could have gone to the theater at that time. Nate, can you imagine going to the theater that summer?
Indeed, I did.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, you were eating well.
Yeah.
So this movie comes in number 21 for the year.
Wow.
Above Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter.
That's one of the good ones, if memory serves.
And right below All of Me.
Oh, that's a good movie.
Okay.
See Martin, Lily Tomlin.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes. So this comes in right below that, which is,
I think Herbert Ross directed it. I don't know.
Okay. Again, it does well, but it's not the sort of blockbuster that, of course, T2 will become.
Right.
However, does very well on home media, as we mentioned, right? Second most rented video cassette of 1985 behind, Adam.
Ghostbusters?
Can you guess? What's number one for 1985?
Back to the Future.
Nope.
And it's not Ghostbusters?
Nope.
Is it a Bond movie?
Nope.
Oh.
We've talked about it on the podcast.
Talked about it on the podcast. Like, we covered it on the podcast? I can't remember what.
The Karate Kid.
The Karate Kid.
Oh,
okay.
shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. So yeah, that's basically how it did.
That's crazy though, that
A masterpiece.
Oh,
a great
love
film.
The Karate Kid. I introduced Adam to The Karate Kid on this podcast, and he's
it's-
very grateful for that.
it's great. That movie rules.
That's a great
But I'm
movie.
kind of fascinated by the fact that Ghostbusters is #1 at the box office, but like doesn't replicate that on home video.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It's 1984. Home video is not what it is now.
Interesting. They announced the sequel in 1985.
Oh wow.
Like right away, they're like, "Yep, we're going to do a sequel," but Cameron doesn't want to direct it. And then eventually he comes on because Arnie's like, "I'll do it if Cameron directs," and that kind of like seals the deal.
Yeah.
And they only start production though in 1990, so there's a real like gap between this and this.
They had like a 10-month window to make the movie
Yeah, October
With-
1990.
with the CGI.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
I guess.
insane.
I know.
But probably
And he's coming after The Abyss, which
Yeah.
flopped.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like probably for the best, right? Like the fact that he didn't just roll right into it. Not just from the like technical standpoint of then he has 5 years to like for the tech to catch up, but it's
Yes.
just like as we're quickly learning with the state of Hollywood today, like movies that are rushed to sequels have a tendency,
Well, he also gets Aliens as almost like a dry run for T2 in certain ways. They're not like 1-to-1, but I do feel like he's testing some stuff out in that movie that then he applies in T2 as well. Which
Yeah,
is
but
nice.
I mean, you read the script for Aliens and you read the script for First Blood 2 that he wrote, and they're the same movie.
Interesting. I did not know that. All right.
No, yeah, he wrote First Blood 2,
Interesting.
which
Okay.
we now call Rambo.
Right. Wow.
Well, that takes us to the age-old question that we have to wrap every episode up with. What is the final verdict? Do the strengths outweigh the weaknesses? Would you recommend this movie, Matt?
The Terminator? Would I
Yes.
recommend The Terminator? No, it's terrible. You shouldn't
Okay.
watch it.
Okay,
it's
cool.
bullshit. It's a bullshit movie.
Score's
there-
terrible, I've heard.
There are not robots from the future. It's fake.
Yeah.
No, I mean, of course, I would say that you need to watch The Terminator, and you don't need to watch The Grift of the Magi, which is like
Fair enough.
an acceptable episode of The Simpsons of its time, but not really something you need to see. There are better episodes of The Simpsons in that season that you should watch.
Yeah.
This isn't one of them.
Yeah, but they're not a Christmas episode. This is
is
our
true.
Christmas
There's
episode.
that.
That's 100% true. This season does feature, in my opinion, the last good to great episode of the show.
Oh.
Okay.
Which is?
E-I-E-I Annoyed Grunt, the Tomako episode.
Tomako.
That is a great episode.
That is a great one.
Which is in my opinion, the last truly great episode of The Simpsons.
And also starts with a really long extended sequence at the
Yes.
Springfield Googleplex. So
It's
there
a
you go.
mess. It's a total mess, but also like I ain't never been slapped with no doongla before. Like, and it has my favorite stealth Simpsons joke.
Okay.
The
Which
Chuck
is-
Sneeden feed?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Because, first of all, I thought that joke was funny just on its own. Just like the
Yeah.
wordplay was funny. And then it occurred to me that it was Chuck
Yeah.
sucking.
Yeah.
And then I was like, now I'm really on board.
Well,
Right,
Matt, we
yes.
did cover that episode, and we paired it with what ended up being, Nate and I came away saying, like, one of the great action-adventure movies of the 90s. I want to get it right. The Mask of Zorro?
There's the Mask of Zorro, and there's two Zorro movies.
The first Zorro
The first
movie,
Zorro
Yes,
movie.
yes.
which rules. We had so much fun watching that. So you can go back in the archive and
No,
hear us talk
I
about
love
it.
that shit. It also has another really exceptional joke where they're congratulating the elephant on fertilizing. Nice work, Petunia. And he just pulls a whole possum out of his pocket and feeds it to the elephant. That's really disgusting. It's really good.
God,
It's a good show. The Simpsons is a good show. Nate,
It turns out The Simpsons is a good show, and we haven't talked about it for a whole hour.
That's how this show works.
Yeah, exactly. Nate, what are your thoughts on Terminator? Your final parting thoughts.
Definitely, you should watch this movie. I would definitely not recommend watching it in the order that I watched them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, watch the first one first, watch the second one second. It's a way better way to watch it. You'll, like, understand the progression way more. The way I first watched these, like, poisoned me on this movie for a long time.
Yeah,
and it took me a long time to, like, unlearn that. Yep. But it's a great movie. It's beautiful. The craftsmanship's amazing. It is emotional and tense, and, like, yeah, it's a great watch. And, like, the special effects are unbelievable. The design of the Terminator is unbelievable. So, yeah, you should definitely check it out. Adam.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't agree more. I think I went into this rewatch kind of not looking forward to it and came away from it being like, no, this movie owns. Like, it's so good. There's a simplicity to it. And this keeps coming up on the show of, like, my appreciation for these films that have simple premises, really, really well executed. And how we've kind of moved away from that in the last 10 or 15 years. Everything has to be high concept or like super elaborate.
Or we have to explain the backstory to everything.
Yeah, it's just
all
like
the time.
This movie would be, it's an hour and 40, I think, or maybe an hour and 50. If this movie were made today, 100% it would be like 2.5 hours long. There'd be so much more stuff in the future. I appreciate the economy of it, but I think you're right, Nate. I think if you come to this coming out of T2, you may be disappointed on your first watch, so you have to readjust your expectations. But if you were able to watch them sort of chronologically, you're in for one hell of a ride. Matt, we always like to also do extra credit, you know, either as a double feature or something that sort of would pair nicely or complement nicely. The obvious answer is T2, and you're more than welcome to give that. But is there something else that if people enjoyed this film, they should go check out?
Oh my God. If you like the Terminator, you need to check out Lady Terminator.
Okay.
It's a Filipino movie called Lady Terminator. I am loath to delve into a description of Lady Terminator, but Lady Terminator is something that you need to see.
This sounds awesome.
I just don't really want to go into detail about it. It's
just go and see it.
Just go and find it. I'm sure you can track it down somewhere. It's probably not streaming. You may need to lean into non-licit sources, but Lady Terminator is something else.
Now, in terms of viewing order, would you recommend Lady Terminator, then Terminator, and then T2, or?
No. Terminator 1, Terminator 2, Lady Terminator.
Got it. Okay, excellent.
Amazing.
Adam, what about you?
Well, I mean, I feel like
you?
I have... What about me? I feel like I have to, because I've danced around it and talked about it so much, I gotta recommend Halloween. I think it would make for a really interesting sort of like pairing because of the similarities and differences. And I mean, obviously, like, Halloween's a masterpiece, and it's
right. You got two great movies.
It defines a genre, and it's also interesting because this is our holiday Christmas special, and Halloween's a Halloween movies. So there you go. We're just really messing. You could have a very interesting December 25th if you watched Halloween. What about you, Nate?
Yeah, I went like a similar route with this, and I'm thinking Westworld, right? And partly because, you know, we talked about it on the pod, so that's like an opportunity to just like, you know, hear what we thought about it, but then check it out. And, you know, it's very clear the relationship between the Yul Brynner performance and the Arnold Schwarzenegger performance in this, but in two completely different stories. The only thing that they have in common is that they're both kind of chase movies, right?
Yeah.
But I would definitely not call that one a slasher movie. Like,
no,
you know, it really doesn't have any of the sort of trappings of the other movies that sort of we now put in that genre. And yet there is this sort of through line with this movie. So I think that would be a really interesting one to check out.
Yeah, totally. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. This was such a pleasure to have you on. I know you joked that you invited yourself, but I'm so glad that you did, because you provided so much like extra color and context to this movie that I don't think Nate and I ever really could have
I want to come back.
So
I want to do more.
You are welcome back anytime. We'll send you the list of possible. Turns out The Simpsons do a lot of movie parodies, so we've got lots of options for you.
Yes.
Is there anything you want to plug while you're here?
Yes. I mean, obviously, I want people to listen to my podcast, The Suspense is Killing Us. I would love for people to tune into Scarecrow's YouTube show, Viva Physical Media. And I would love people to explore Scarecrow Video's Rent by Mail program. A lot of people can't access our catalog because they don't live in Seattle, but we do rent by mail in the continental U.S.
Awesome.
I know you guys are from Canada.
I'm in the States. I'm in Jersey, so I will partake.
Okay, well, that's good because you both sound really Canadian.
Yes, I do.
But yeah, I mean, hit up Scarecrow Video. We have 150,000 individual titles.
Wow.
If you take Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, like every major streaming service, you combine what's available to them a la carte, we have about 3 times what they have.
Amazing.
And now, not all of that is accessible by mail because we can't send things that are super rare or videotapes through the mail because we just can't trust the mail. But there's a lot you can access. It's not the most streamlined. It's not the most cheap option. But like, if you want to rent some obscure shit through the mail, we can help you with that.
Like Lady Terminator?
We can rent you Lady Terminator through the mail. I guarantee
Nate,
you can't stream that shit.
All right.
And so we can hook you up with that. And so that's all I want to plug. Like I have the podcast, I have the YouTube show. I would prefer that you send your money to Scarecrow.
Very cool.
Amazing.
Very cool.
Love that exists.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of the Springfield Googleplex, the movie podcast for Simpson fans. If you have enjoyed what you heard, please leave us a review and share this episode with the Simpson fans and Terminator fans and film buffs in your life. We've also set up a support page on our website where, if you want, you can throw us a couple of bucks to help cover the cost of making this show. Obviously, the year is wrapping up. The show is going to be taking a little hiatus, a little break. We're going to be away maybe for a little bit longer than we have in the past, but the hope is that we'll take a longer break and then we'll be able to come back with even more content for you for a much longer period of time. So please do not unsubscribe in the meantime. We promise we will be back. We love you. Thank you for listening. Until next time, Nate.
We'll see you around the Plex.
See you around the Plex. Now I get to tell my 6 degrees of separation story about James Cameron that Nate does not remember.
Oh, let's go.
Okay.
You really don't remember this, Nate?
I don't. Once you start saying it, I'll probably remember.
So,
it. Yeah.
Matt, Nate and I went to an arts high school in Ontario, and our drama teacher...
Are you both from Ontario?
Yes.
We are, yeah. I moved to the States a long time ago, but I grew up there.
I mean, I hear your accent.
Yeah. I still say about.
But
yeah.
So our drama teacher is from, I want to say, like Niagara Falls region, and she went to high school with James Cameron. But not only did she go to high school with James Cameron, her best friend was James Cameron's high school girlfriend.
Oh, shit.
And they used to hang out in her basement, and like they would like...
So he's like 17?
Yeah, and like he and her best friend were like making out on her couch. And he said how he wanted to make movies and all this stuff. Wow. And so you don't remember
that.
this story?
I don't know if I knew that.
Oh, okay. Well,
man, that is intense.
So our drama teacher like knew James Cameron when he was like Jimmy Cameron,
like a baby.
Yeah.
Oh, come on.
Dreaming about making the Terminator.
Yeah. Just like in a small town in
She's like, can I have a couple of $1 billion?
Yeah, I don't know if like he probably wouldn't remember, but I think that's super cool. It's because everyone forgets like he's Canadian, right? Like he's from just like a little town in. Where is he originally? Let's see.
I think he said I think he was born north of the Arctic Circle. I was like, what? Are you like? Is that a joke or are you being serious?
Well,
I think he moved quickly.
He doesn't know how jokes go. He doesn't joke.
It is 81 miles northwest of Timmins, so like he's not.
Oh, that's pretty.
It's pretty far up there. Yeah,
I don't know what that means.
No, you wouldn't, but
Really far north.
really far north.
I'm in,
Yeah,
still
I'm
in
in
Ontario.
Seattle.
Yeah.
yeah. He attended Stamford Collegiate in Niagara Falls. So there you
Okay.
go. It was Niagara
Okay.
Falls. So
Shit.
crazy.
That's bonkers. Yeah, I don't remember that story.
Yeah. Well, there you go.